Chapter 671. What was the Khanate Alliance? It was an alliance formed by all the Khanate races in the primordial world in order to fight against the human race. It was also the predecessor of the primordial world's 10,000 races. In the great war between heaven and earth, they had fought countless battles with the human race. Blood could be said to have dyed the primordial world red. Although the Khanate Alliance had received Fushi's favor during the disaster of the beasts, most of the Khanate races had chosen to bury the hatchet with the human race. However, there were still a small number of Khanate races who did not let go of their hatred for the human race. Instead, they chose to draw a line with the human race. These Khanate races were the main war faction of the Khanate Alliance. As the main war faction, they could be said to be the main force of the Khanate Alliance against the human race. They were at the forefront of every battle. After countless battles, countless of their clansmen had died at the hands of the human race. These blood feuds had accumulated, causing them to form an irreconcilable enmity with the human race. Thus, how could they submit to the human race? Therefore, after the Khanate Alliance collapsed, the other Khanate races joined the human race. These Khanate races who had a death grudge with the human race joined forces to deal with the Khanate beasts. From then on, they had a new name, the Khanate Vestigial Race, the race left behind from the Khanate era. Without a doubt, since these Khanate Vestigial Race dared to become enemies with the human race, their strength must be extremely powerful. Although they could not fight against Khanate beasts, they could still survive. Under the protection of each other, the Khanate Vestigial Race survived the tribulation of Khanate beasts with difficulty. But then, before they could take revenge on the human race, they suddenly realized that the human race was already a colossus that they could not shake. At that time, Fushi suppressed the primordial world. No one in the 10,000 races could contend against him. Helpless, these Khanate Vestigial Race temporarily gave up the idea of revenge and focused on developing to wait for the future. Unfortunately, although their strength increased quickly, the human race undoubtedly developed faster. As time passed, the gap between them and the human race did not decrease. Instead, it became bigger and bigger. Their hope of revenge was getting slimmer and slimmer. Then, the Khanate Vestigial Race had been waiting for heaven and earth isolation. After heaven and earth isolation, they could not stay in the primordial world any longer. Therefore, they sought refuge with the great divine ability. They hoped that one day, a peerless figure would be born in their race and completely destroy the human race. In the blink of an eye, the world had changed. In the blink of an eye, millions of years had passed. At this time, the pre-celestial descendants who were practicing in the Taoist field of the Great Medium suddenly received an order from the Taoist priests to go to the untainted land to attack the human tribe. It was this order that awakened the hatred in the hearts of the Xiantian vestigial races towards the human race. Almost without hesitation, they walked out of the great master's dojos and brazenly charged at the humans. Things were different now. In the past, they weren't a match for the human race, not because they weren't strong enough, but because the human race had the support of a great divine ability. But now, the situation had completely reversed. The human race had somehow angered the Celestial Sect of Wonders, causing the Celestial Sect of Wonders to turn around and support them against the human race. In this way, the human race would no longer have any advantages. How could they withstand their attacks? One must know that, in the primordial world, the will of the Celestial Sect of Wonders was the will of the heavenly Tao. Since the human race dared to make an enemy out of the Celestial Sect of Wonders, their fate was already sealed. They were bound to fail. The human race was finished. Just as the battle between the human race and the pre-celestial vestigial race was in full swing, in the depths of the void, where countless worlds and secret realms were located, an inexplicable change suddenly occurred. One after another, cracks in the void appeared, opening up a passage that led to the untainted land. You've been here for nearly 10 million years. It's time to let the untainted land know of your existence. So go. Go to the untainted land and fight with the human race. Let the world know that the creatures I created may not be inferior to the Nuwa. In the dark, a dignified voice echoed between heaven and earth, breaking the silence of this place. Yes, Patriarch. Suddenly, a respectful voice came from the countless worlds and secret realms. Then, countless figures walked out of the unknown world. They were densely packed and innumerable. They crossed the void cracks and headed towards the untainted land. That was postnatal life forms. That's right. These creatures that walked out of the unknown world. Although their forms were strange, the aura they exuded was compatible with the untainted land. In fact, it faintly resonated with the postnatal chi. Without a doubt, this was the aura that belonged to postnatal life forms. The countless creatures that walked out of the unknown world were all postnatal life forms. Variables, what a shocking change. As the only postnatal race in the untainted land, the human race could enjoy the postnatal luck alone. However, with the appearance of these races, the luck of the human race would definitely be affected. Although it wouldn't shake their foundation, it wouldn't be too good either. The human race was in trouble. Perhaps these postnatal life forms wouldn't be very strong, but they were definitely disgusting enough. For the human race, once they started a war with these postnatal life forms, even if they won, they wouldn't get anything. At most, they would stabilize their postnatal luck. However, once they lost, the losses would undoubtedly be huge. A portion of the postnatal luck that originally belonged to the human race would definitely be given to those postnatal life forms. There was no benefit in winning. But if they lost, they would suffer great losses. How could these postnatal life forms not be disgusting? Odd. The sudden appearance of these postnatal life forms was the biggest backup plan left behind by the great magicians of the celestial sect of wonders to deal with the human race. The prenatal vestigial race was just an appetizer. The postnatal life forms were the real trump card. As for the origin of these postnatal life forms, it was simple. They were nothing more than secretly created by the great magicians. Of course, the purpose of those great magicians creating these postnatal life forms was not to deal with the human race, but to seek merit and verify the path of Tao in exchange for an opportunity to take a step further. At that time, in the untainted land, Goddess Nuwa first created humans and achieved Tao. After that, Taoist Mingi created the Azura clan in the Blood Sea and obtained a large amount of merit. So he took a step further. It was when they saw this scene that those great magicians couldn't help but have the idea of creating a postnatal race. There was no loss in trying. What if they succeeded? Even if they didn't take a step further like Mingi, as long as they could gain something, it wouldn't be a loss. It could even be a gain. If they could obtain some merit, that would be even better. With such thoughts in mind, the great magicians hid in the dark for a period of time and created all kinds of postnatal life forms for the untainted land. As for why these postnatal life forms had never appeared in the untainted land for so many years, the answer was much simpler. It was nothing more than that the great magicians were afraid that after these postnatal life forms appeared, they would have a dispute with the shaman and demon race, which would implicate them. For this reason, they restrained these postnatal life forms in the many worlds in the depths of the void, allowing them to develop in a low-key manner. In this way, they didn't have to worry about them getting involved in the disputes of the untainted land, and it also saved them a lot of trouble. However, they didn't expect that the changes in the world were often unexpected. Who would have known that as time passed, the Khanate era gradually became the past, and the postnatal era ushered in a period of rapid development? The postnatal life forms that were almost forgotten by the great magicians gradually became the favorites of the era. At the same time, they also became the sharp weapons of the great magicians to deal with the human race. Rumble. The moment those postnatal life forms stepped into the untainted land, The long river of destiny in the mysterious and unknown space immediately sensed it. The long river of destiny that represented the human race suddenly began to shake violently, and there was a faint trend of splitting. It looked unusually frightening. The moment the destiny of the human race changed, the few existences that were closely related to the human race sensed it almost at the same time. What? Why is the destiny of the human race in turmoil? In the heavenly court, the North Star Emperor couldn't help but frown. Then he subconsciously glanced at the untainted land. In just an instant, he understood what had happened. In an instant, the North Star Emperor's face darkened, and it became abnormally ugly. Disgusting. It was really too disgusting. If it were any other time, even if these postnatal life forms swarmed up, they wouldn't be enough to fight against the human race. They would be easily suppressed. But now the human race was facing enemies from both sides. If they fought with these postnatal life forms again, they would seem a little inferior. The reason for this was not because these postnatal life forms were too strong, but because in the battle with the postnatal life forms, the human race could not lose a single battle, and they could not have a tug of war with them. Let's put it this way, if the human race could not completely kill these postnatal life forms before they could gain a foothold in the untainted land, then the human race would have already lost the battle with these postnatal life forms. And the longer the war lasted, the greater the losses of the human race. The reason was because once these postnatal life forms gained a foothold in the untainted land, a portion of the postnatal destiny would be separated from the human race's destiny and flow to these postnatal life forms. Moreover, this providence was not fixed. The greater the advantage of these postnatal life forms, the greater the destiny that would flow from the human race's destiny to them. The meaning of their existence was to drink the blood of the human race. Fellow Taoists, what a good method! I have underestimated you. However, if you want to overthrow the human race with just these postnatal life forms, you are thinking too much. Glancing coldly at everyone, the North Star Emperor said coldly. However, no one responded to his words. In this, the North Star Emperor was not surprised. Instead, he secretly thought of a countermeasure. The appearance of the postnatal life forms was indeed beyond his expectations, but this was not a big deal. The human race had a deep foundation. Even when the myriad races were at their peak, they were not afraid, let alone now. Although the human race's current situation was extremely dangerous, that was all on the surface. It was only because accidents happened one after another that the human race was caught off guard, resulting in the current situation. However, as long as they could survive the current period, all the turmoil would be quelled one by one. The human race was not as weak as they had imagined. The Seven Stars continent had not made a move yet, and the allies of the human race had not made a move either. It could be seen that the true foundation of the human race had not been activated yet. This, Feng Zichen knew. The great divinities also knew. Therefore, in order to deal with the human race, the great divinities definitely had some backup plans. In the untainted land, only the demon race and the shaman race could pose a threat to the human race. As an ally of the human race, the shaman race would not attack the human race, so only the demon race could do so. With a thought, the North Star Emperor thought of the final trump card of the great divinities, the demon race. If the demon race took advantage of the chaos to attack, they could indeed threaten the human race. One had to know. After the battle between the shaman and the demon race, although the demon race suffered great loss and was almost completely wiped out, a portion of the demon race's strength was preserved. That was the North Sea demon race under demon Master Kuan-Pung. Due to his bad relationship with Di Jun, Patriarch Kuan-Pung had always worked but not put in any effort in the heavenly court. For this reason, during the battle between the shaman and the demon race, only Patriarch Kuan-Pung of the entire North Sea demon race fought. Moreover, at the end of the battle, this fellow ran away with He Tu and Luo Shu when he saw that the situation was not good. He had really tricked Dijun. However, although Patriarch Kunpeng's actions were despicable, it was precisely because of this that the North Sea demon race was able to preserve their strength and become a major force in the untainted land. Although the North Sea demon race was only a branch of the demon race, they might not be weaker than the current human race. Therefore, if the North Sea demon race attacked the human race would really be in danger. Thinking of this, Emperor Gaochen couldn't help but lower his gaze and look at the North Sea to observe the current situation of the North Sea demon race. However, before he could look at the North Sea, a loud explosion suddenly came from the heavenly realm. Bang! The moment he heard the loud explosion, Emperor Gaochen's heart skipped a beat, and he had an ominous premonition. When he looked over and saw the source of the explosion, his heart couldn't help but sink. But the heavenly river had burst its banks. Someone had blasted a huge hole in the heavenly dike. The explosion just now was the sound of the heavenly dike breaking. What a bastard! Even though he knew that in order to deal with the human race, those powerful beings had no scruples, when Gaochen saw the scene of the heavenly river bursting its banks, he couldn't help but exclaim at their audacity. They really didn't care about anything. They even dared to have designs on the heavenly river. Didn't they know that once the water of the heavenly river fell into the human world, what kind of disaster would it bring to the human world? That monstrous negative karma. Weren't they afraid at all? Walala! Following the gap in the heavenly dike, the Ruah River flowed towards the untainted land. It was as if the Milky Way was falling from the ninth heaven. Its momentum was so great that it was completely unstoppable. It seemed that this scene had also happened when the heavenly realm was shattered. However, at that time the untainted land was still in the Khanate era. The Khanate Chi was everywhere in the world, so there was no need to be afraid of polluting the Ruah River. P.S. What a mess! There's one more chapter. It's about 11:30. It should also be 4,000 words. Chapter 672. However, the Eldritch world had completely fallen into the postnatal era. The world was filled with mortal chi. The weak water was heavenly water. It belonged to the Khanate realm. Once it was tainted by the postnatal chi, it would definitely become extremely heavy. Moreover, the Khanate realm and the postnatal realm were two different concepts. In ancient times, everyone had Khanate physiques and did not dare to touch the weak water. Needless to say, most of the living beings now had postnatal physiques. Disaster! It had suddenly descended upon them. For a moment, in the Eldritch world, the flood was surging. The weak water was Khanate water. In addition, it was illuminated by the starlight day and night. It had undergone a huge change and contained a huge amount of energy. As soon as it landed on the Eldritch world, it was affected by the laws of heaven and earth and began to transform from Khanate to postnatal realm. If a drop of Khanate water completely transformed into postnatal water, it would probably be as much as a river. One could imagine what kind of disaster it would be for the people when the heavenly river flowed into the Eldritch world. Damn it! Seeing that the heavenly river was flowing into the Eldritch world, Gaochen did not care about the great divines anymore. He immediately took out the Pantheon painting and turned it into a sky screen to block the gap in the heavenly river. After that, he released his divine thought and enveloped the entire heavenly court. Gaochen stretched out his hand and grabbed at a certain palace in the heavenly court. How dare you continue to stay in the heavenly court after destroying the heavenly dike? Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Rumble. As Gaochen pressed down with his palm, the shadows of the 5 emperors vaguely appeared. They released endless emperor aura, causing the space-time in that area to completely freeze. 5 emperors' great handprint. In the next moment, the 5 emperors' great handprint exploded with terrifying power and tore the palace into pieces. At the same time, Gaochen grabbed a slightly wretched figure out of the broken palace. under the suppression of the 5 emperors' great handprint. That person could not even resist, let alone escape. Who sent you? Gaochen Emperor ignored that person's struggle and asked coldly. Violent killing intent surged out of his body and turned into an unparalleled chill. It froze space-time and destroyed that person's hope. The hope of survival. From the beginning to the end, Gaochen did not ask about that person's identity because there was no need to. This person was dead for sure. No matter where he came from, he had to die. Since he dared to destroy the heavenly river, he had to pay the price, and that price was death. Not only did he have to die, but even the forces behind him had to pay the price. And the reason why he wasn't dead now was because he still had a trace of value, and that was the identity of the person behind him. How could a mere Daluo Jinxian have the guts to destroy the heavenly river? It was nothing more than the support of someone even more powerful. That's right, the person who dared to destroy the heavenly river was a Daluo Jinxian. What a joke! A mere Daluo Jinxian dared to destroy the heavenly river. If a quasi-sage were to make a move, wouldn't the heavenly court be overturned? Who is it? Seeing that the person did not answer, the North Star could not help but tighten its grip on his hand. Suddenly, the person let out a shrill scream as his entire body and primordial spirit shattered together. Only a trace of the innate, undying true spirit was left as it struggled desperately in the North Star's hand. Speak! Without giving the person a chance to breathe, the North Star Emperor continued to ask. Boom! As he spoke, the unique aura of the Celestial Emperor erupted from his body and crushed toward the person. The moment the Celestial Emperor's aura swept across, the person's remaining innate, undying, true spirit seemed to have been erased by someone, and half of it quietly disappeared. But even after suffering such a painful blow, the person still did not say a word. You're quite loyal. However, do you think I won't be able to find out who sent you? Then you and the people behind you are underestimating this humble one's methods. Seeing that he could not get anything out of the person, the North Star Emperor's heart stirred. Suddenly, the universe shook as an illusory river appeared from the void. It came majestically and drowned the remaining half of the person's innate, undying, true spirit. In the next instant, space-time fragments danced and reflected the person's past. The river of space-time. The illusory river summoned by the North Star Emperor was the most mysterious and dangerous place in the primordial world. The river of space-time. With Pangu personally guarding the source of the river of space-time, no one could reverse the past and the future. Karma was the cause. However, although the past could not be changed, it was not impossible to use the river of space-time to observe everything that happened in the past. In the end, it was because Mount Bujo was gone. It greatly reduced the danger level of the river of space-time. If it was in the past, not to mention summoning the projection of the river of space-time, even entering the river of space-time would be suppressed by Mount Bujo. But now, there was no need to worry about such a situation happening. To be precise, it started from the time when Mount Bujo collapsed. As long as they did not interfere with the past, everyone could freely enter the river of space-time and observe the past. Of course, it was only limited to the time after that. Everything before the end of the ancient era could not be easily checked, because at that time, Mount Bujo still existed. Now that there was no Mount Bujo in the future, everyone could spy on it. However, in the past, Mount Bujo still existed. Therefore, anyone who dared to spy on that period of time had to be prepared to pay the price. In short, because of the absence of Mount Bujo, the river of space-time was much safer now. With Primordial Chaos Tao Master's ability, he could already borrow some of the power of the river of space-time without suffering any backlash. What the North Star Emperor needed to do now was to use the river of space-time to reflect that person's past and find the identity of the person behind the scenes. In the primordial world, memories could be faked. True spirits could also be faked. But in the past, because of Pangu, it was impossible to fake it. Therefore, no matter how deeply the person behind the scenes hid or how many faces he changed, he could not escape the reflection of the river of space-time. Spying on that person's memories might not be able to find out the identity of the person behind the scenes, because no one could guarantee that the person behind the scenes would show his true face. However, the river of space-time could lock onto the true identity of the person behind the scenes, because the river of space-time recorded everything in the primordial world. As long as one's cultivation had not reached the realm of primordial chaos Daluo-Jinxian, they would definitely leave traces in the river of space-time. Whether it was in the past, present, or future, as long as they left traces, it was enough for the North Star Emperor to lock onto the identity of the person behind the scenes. Rumble. The river of space-time was vast and mighty, reflecting that person's past one by one. Soon, the North Star Emperor locked onto his target. It was a strange scene. In the scene, the person who destroyed the heavenly river was talking to someone, but there was nothing in front of him. It wasn't that there was no one in front of him, but that the person who was talking to him was too powerful and had already cut off the past. Therefore, he couldn't see his figure in the past. Cut off the past. Not bad. But I don't believe that you've also cut off the present and the future. With a thought, the North Star Emperor froze the scene and used the void as a basis to push the river of space-time back to the future. Hiss! Is this what a Taoist master can do? Shaking the universe with a raise of his hand and playing with the river of space-time. How terrifying! At the side, the powerful beings who were monitoring the North Star Emperor were so shocked that they were speechless when they saw him playing with the river of space-time. Such means and such a realm were what they dreamed of. At this time, they didn't dare to disturb the North Star Emperor. That was because everyone could tell that the North Star Emperor was in a fit of anger. If they interfered with him now, would they really want to die? Moreover, the North Star Emperor was currently investigating the real culprit behind the Heavenly River's breach. If anyone interfered at this time, wouldn't it be equivalent to admitting that they were the culprit? The Heavenly River's breach caused a flood in the Eldritch world, and countless people suffered. The karma involved was no less than killing the human emperor, who would be willing to take the blame. At this time, not to mention the North Star Emperor, even the powerful beings were cursing the mastermind in their hearts. Why did he touch the Heavenly River all of a sudden? Wasn't he looking for trouble? One had to know that the attack of the weak water was indiscriminate. Any existence in the Eldritch world would be affected. In other words, their subordinates were also within the attack range of the weak water. However, the only consolation was that the human race was the most powerful, so they were affected more than others. That could be considered a blessing in disguise. After finding out the identity of the mastermind from the future, the North Star Emperor didn't hold back. He directly used the future to deduce the mastermind's location. Die. After taking a few glances, the North Star Emperor realized that he didn't know who the mastermind was. He couldn't be bothered to pursue the mastermind's purpose. He directly took out the Zichin sword, broke through the void, and slashed at the mastermind. At the same time, in order to prevent the mastermind from escaping, he even mobilized the power of the North Star to forcefully seal the void where the mastermind was. Even so, the North Star Emperor felt that it wasn't safe. He then used the Buzhou Dao seal, a supreme space-time technique to assist the North Star in sealing the space-time. Swoosh! The Zichin sword slashed out, carrying the power of the innate sword Dao. It was like the incarnation of Dao, and it directly injured the mastermind who was caught off guard. Without a sound, the physical body of the person behind the scenes was turned into dust under the sword light. Buzz! Just as the body of the mastermind was shattered, a clear light escaped from it and flew towards the distance. That clear light, it was the innate, undying, true spirit of the mastermind. Although he didn't know how he was exposed, he didn't have time to think about what was happening. It was more important for him to escape. However, before his innate, undying, true spirit could escape far, he he saw a star shadow that emitted a terrifying heavenly aura. The unparalleled divine aura froze him on the spot. Then, before he could react, he saw the shadow of an immortal sacred mountain appear one after another. It emitted an aura that suppressed everything. Together with the previous star shadow, it completely sealed his escape route. Go. Above the heavenly court, after seeing that the mastermind was completely suppressed, Emperor Gauchen waved his hand and summoned the million-sword illustration to bring him over. Do you really think that you can do whatever you want just because you're an immortal? If I don't make you pay the price today, where will the heavenly court's face be? Emperor Gauchen, who had been suppressing his anger, finally found a target to vent it on. He grabbed the innate, indestructible, true spirit of the mastermind and crushed it into pieces. However, that wasn't the end. Emperor Gauchen pointed at the heavenly court, and the golden dragon of luck, formed by the heavenly court's providence, immediately sensed it. It roared to the sky and swallowed the fragments of the mastermind's true spirit into its stomach. Today, I'll use the providence of the heavenly court to suppress your true spirit. You'll never be able to reincarnate. After doing all that, Emperor Gauchen's majestic voice resounded throughout the heavenly court. SSS. On the other side, the immortal sacred mountain, who witnessed all that was happening, was terrified by Emperor Gauchen's means. That immortal sacred mountain was completely done for. Although the immortal sacred mountain was an immortal, it didn't mean that they couldn't be suppressed. Gauchen used the providence of the heavenly court to suppress that person's true spirit and completely cut off all hope of resurrection. From then on, as long as the heavenly court wasn't destroyed, that immortal sacred mountain would never be able to regain his freedom. Such means it was truly ruthless. It also shocked the immortal sacred mountain present. They truly felt the terror of a primordial chaos powerhouse. A powerhouse that wasn't inferior to them was completely suppressed in a few breaths' time. This simply smashed their pride into smithereens. The bloody truth told them that primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian was really not on the same level as them. The difference was extremely huge. Almost subconsciously, everyone unconsciously moved closer. It was as if only by doing so could they bring a sense of security. In fact, that was the case. If it weren't for the fact that they had more people, Gauchen would have killed them long ago. After suppressing the real culprit behind the scenes, Emperor Gauchen turned his gaze to Daluo Jinxian, who had destroyed the heavenly river. Humph! And you? Since the heavenly river has burst its banks because of you, then you should contribute to quelling the flood. With that, Emperor Gauchen flicked his finger and sent him into the primordial world. At the same time, he used the will of heaven as a knife and slashed down along the bloodline karma of Daluo Jinxian. In a trance, a sorrowful cry seemed to come from the long river of fate. Then, the innate imprint in the body of a certain innate race of the primordial world suddenly disappeared, and their bloodline began to degenerate. In the blink of an eye, they were completely reduced to mortals. They didn't show any magic power at all. Even Tai Jinxian was no exception. Moreover, shackles appeared in the unseen world, locking their cultivation door, preventing them from embarking on the path of cultivation in the future. Without a doubt, this was the clansman of Daluo Jinxian. Because of him, they had paid an unbearable price. P.S. I updated 12,000 words today. I didn't go back on my word. I beg for votes next month. As for whether I will update tomorrow, it will depend on today's results. Chapter 673. Those who bring disaster to the world deserve such an ending. After doing all this, the North Star Emperor's cold voice reverberated between heaven and earth. The murderous intent in his voice was so strong that it made everyone feel as if they were facing a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. For a moment, the deities trembled. Even the great mediums felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts when they saw how ruthless the North Star Emperor was. What was the meaning of killing one to warn the rest? This was it. He was afraid that after this matter, anyone who wanted to offend the heavenly courts would have to think twice about it. Where's the Sky River Water Tribe? After dealing with the external enemies, the North Star Emperor had the time to deal with the traitor. However, one Daluo Jinxian was able to destroy the Sky Dike under the heavy guard of the heavenly court. It would be strange if there was no problem. There was no doubt that there was a traitor in the heavenly court. This was because, without the help of a traitor, a mere Daluo Jinxian would not be able to destroy the Sky Dike. One had to know that the Sky River was an important place in the heavenly court. Not only was it guarded by the Navy, but it was also enveloped by the Khanate formation. Furthermore, the Heavenly River's water tribe lived within it. With 3 layers of security, someone could still destroy the Sky Dike under their nose. Could this be explained by negligence? The Sky River is here. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. As the Sky River's water surface shook, a middle-aged Taoist walked out from the bottom of the water and quickly came to the North Star Emperor. He apologized with a pale face. Sky River Taoist. The middle-aged Taoist who walked out from the bottom of the Sky River was called Sky River Taoist. He was a great cultivator whose strength had reached the level of Daluo Jinxian. He was not a living being born in the Sky River. Instead, he was a Khanate god fiend from the primitive water tribe. However, because he had joined the heavenly court earlier, Great Heaven wanted to show his sincerity. Of course, he also had the intention to buy bones with 1,000 gold taels. Hence, he specially gave him preferential treatment and granted him the position of the Lord of the Sky River. He also allowed his people to live in the Sky River with him. That was how the name Sky River Taoist came about. This was not his name before, but he changed it after coming to the Celestial River so that he could occupy the destiny of the Celestial River. The Sky River Taoist was the master of the Sky River. Now that the Sky River was in trouble, he could not escape responsibility. Furthermore, as a fellow Daluo Jinxian who controlled the innate formation that protected the Heavenly River, there was no reason that Sky River Taoist could not detect the arrival of the enemy. But he just didn't notice. That could only mean that there was something wrong with him. Moreover, even if there was nothing wrong with the Sky River Taoist, he would not be able to escape the crime of neglecting his duty. At the end of the day, someone had to take responsibility for the Heavenly River's breach. And Sky River Taoist was the best candidate. Sky River Taoist, as the ruler of the Sky River, you can't escape responsibility, no matter what. Therefore, I don't care if you're a spy for a powerful expert or if you're neglecting your duties. I'm only punishing you and your clansmen to fill the heavenly dike. So are you convinced? The North Star Emperor's light words were as heavy as an immemorial divine mountain. Each word pressed down on the Sky River Taoist's heart, causing his face to turn snow white in an instant. Yes, Your Majesty. Although he was unwilling, the Sky River Taoist did not dare to resist. Your Majesty, I'll take my leave. Finally, the Sky River Taoist bowed respectfully to the North Star Emperor and led his clansmen toward the gap in the Heavenly River. Rumble. The Heavenly Dike shook and swallowed the Sky River Taoist and his clansmen. In an instant, divine light bloomed and laws filled the air. It was so dazzling that people could not open their eyes. After everything calmed down, the Heavenly River had returned to its original state. As for the Sky River aquatic race, they had disappeared. They would not be able to appear in the Eldritch world for a few more eons. The North Star Emperor had suppressed the chaos in the Heavenly Court with lightning speed. The power of the North Star Emperor had shocked everyone. Humph. The world has really changed. Now, any Tom, Dick, and Harry dares to cause trouble in the Heavenly Court. The North Star Emperor glanced at the great divinities and said casually. It was just that his words seemed to be directed at the great divines. As a result, The expressions of those great mediums turned ugly when they heard his words. However, before they could get angry, the North Star Emperor suddenly stood up from the emperor's throne in the heavenly court and walked out. For a moment, everyone could not be bothered to get angry. They went forward to block the North Star Emperor to prevent him from leaving the heavenly court. "Your Majesty, where are you going?" Outside the southern heavenly gate, a great divinity asked the North Star Emperor with a smile. Now that the outcome of the battle had not been decided, how could they allow the North Star Emperor to leave the heavenly court? "What's wrong? Do I need your permission to go anywhere? Fellow Taoists, don't you think you're meddling too much?" Gauchen said with displeasure as he faced the crowd alone. Hearing that, everyone fell silent. They indeed had no reason to stop the North Star Emperor. However, in this world there was no need for so many reasons. As long as they wanted to, it was enough. Therefore, the North Star Emperor must not leave the heavenly court. Fed in the silence, the North Star Emperor suddenly took a step forward. At the same time, he was closer to the great divinities, almost face to face. However, none of the great divinities backed down. The atmosphere, suddenly he became nervous. "Fellow Taoists, now that the Eldritch Wilderness is flooded, countless living beings are suffering. As the Heavenly Emperor, of course, I can't stay out of this. Now, I'm going to the Eldritch Wilderness to find a solution to the flood." "Even so, you still want to stop me?" Suddenly, the North Star Emperor spoke. For the first time, he explained the reason for this trip to the heavenly court. This, for a moment, everyone could not help but be stunned. They did not know what to do. The North Star Emperor left the heavenly court for the sake of solving the flood. If they continued to stop him, it would be disregarding the lives of the people in the world. It would be unrighteous, and they would bear a huge burden of karma. Although, with their current actions, it had nothing to do with righteousness. However, this was how things were. They could do it, but not say it. For this, the great divinities were in a dilemma. If they let the North Star Emperor leave the heavenly court just like that, wouldn't their previous efforts be in vain? Naturally, they were extremely unwilling to accept this. However, if they did not let the North Star Emperor leave, the karma that would result was not something that they could easily bear. Enough! Fellow Taoists, you are not children anymore. Why can't you tell what's important and what's urgent? Previously, I allowed you to fool around because I gave face to the Tao ancestor and didn't argue with you. However, this is not the right for you to be arrogant. If you continue to fool around like this, then don't blame me for not showing mercy. I'll drag you all to the Purple Cloud Palace and let the Tao ancestor take a good look at his disciples." Seeing that everyone was still not giving way, the North Star Emperor's expression changed, and he scolded them loudly. A great divinity was compared to an ignorant child in his mouth. What kind of humiliation was this? To be honest, the damage that the North Star Emperor's words caused to them was even worse than killing them directly. After the North Star Emperor finished speaking, the eyes of those great divinities turned red. If they did not know that the gap between them was too huge, they would have long swarmed forward and torn the North Star Emperor into pieces. However, even so, the violent killing intent still surged out of their bodies and stabbed towards the North Star Emperor without any concealment. TSK, the North Star Emperor only smiled contemptuously and did not take it to heart at all. A group of losers, they were not worth his attention. Those who lost to me will never be my opponents. I'll give you time to catch up until you can't see me anymore. This was what the protagonist of a novel that Feng Zichen liked very much in his previous life had said. It was also the true portrayal of his current state of mind. These people had already been left far behind by him. As time passed, this gap would become bigger and bigger. They were no longer existences on the same level. They were not a match for the North Star Emperor now, and they would not be a match for him in the future. Since that was the case, why would they need to save face for these great divinities? Moreover, compared to death, it was obvious that humiliation would bring more harm to them. The great divinities who had lived for countless years were not afraid of death. On the contrary, death might bring them relief. The long years had worn away too many of their emotions, including the fear of death. Perhaps the only thing that could not be wiped away by time was their firm hearts towards the Tao. Death was not worth their fear, and the only thing that could move them was probably that face. The primordial world was a place that valued face very much. For this reason, the harm brought by humiliation was even more unacceptable than killing them directly. It was with such thoughts that the North Star Emperor did his best to humiliate them. This was revenge that left a deeper impression on them than killing. Get out of the way. Ignoring the killing intent on everyone, the North Star Emperor scolded again. You, secretly clenching their fists. Everyone suppressed the killing intent in their hearts and slowly opened up a path for the North Star Emperor to pass through. The reason why these great divinities made way was not because they were afraid of the North Star Emperor, but because they were afraid of Tao ancestor, Hongjun. They were frightened by the words of the North Star Emperor that he wanted to bring them to the Purple Cloud Palace to seek justice from the Tao ancestor. If this matter did not reach the Tao ancestor, the Tao ancestor would turn a blind eye to it. However, once the North Star Emperor made a fuss about this matter, the Tao ancestor would be embarrassed, and it would not be easy for him to seek revenge. Then, with their recent actions after the Tao ancestor found out, he would definitely not let them off easily. Therefore, these great divinities could only give in. Just like that, the North Star Emperor swaggered out of the heavenly court. However, he did not go to the human race. Instead, he went directly to the North Sea and taught the Kunpeng Patriarch a lesson in the name of the Tao discussion. For this, the North Sea demon race, who were previously restless and had the intention to dominate the primordial world, instantly wilted. Not to mention the North Star Emperor, just the primordial world, because of the flood, caused all the deployments of the human race to be in vain. Similarly, the innate vestigial race and the postnatal life forms were not having a good time either. At this time, no one was in the mood to attack each other. They all stopped fighting and organized their own forces to quell the flood. However, it was not so easy to quell the flood. The weak water was a highly toxic thing to the innate life forms, let alone the postnatal life forms. Basically, once a mortal came into contact with the weak water, they would be turned into white bones in less than an hour. Even a celestial immortal cultivator would have to shed a layer of skin if they fell into it. How could such a dangerous thing be so easy to quell? Therefore, in the beginning, everyone was helpless against the weak water. They could only think of a way to block it somewhere and prevent it from spreading everywhere. However, the effect of this method was not very good. That was because after the weak water came to the mortal world, it began to transform into the postnatal world, causing its volume to become larger and larger. It could not be blocked at all. For this, in less than 100 years, the weak water overflowed in the primordial world. Of course, it was not completely without good news. At the very least, after the weak water changed from the innate to the postnatal, the degree of danger was undoubtedly greatly reduced. Above the innate stage, one could basically not be affected by the weak water. At this time in the human territory, as the weak water became more and more overflowing, Si Wenming could not help but feel that blocking it was not a solution at all. Why not lead it to the East Sea? It was at this moment that Si Wenming had a flash of inspiration and thought of a way to completely solve the weak water. That was to lead it to the East Sea. This idea could not be said to be not bold, because before this, the primordial waters were independent and not connected to the sea. Si Wenming's idea was to open up the connection between the primordial waters and the sea so that the weak water could flow from the ground to the sea. If this was done, it would be an earth-shaking change for the primordial waters. This might set off a battle between the sea gods and the sea gods, because once the two were connected, then they would both be water element luck. The sea area luck and the water area luck would definitely merge into one. In this way, although it would strengthen the water element luck, it would also bury a huge hidden danger. The sea had always been the territory of the dragon race, but the primordial waters were not. Although it was not as vast as the four seas, it had also given birth to many innate god-fiends. Therefore, if the sea area and the water area were connected, a complete water system would be born. Then, in order to compete for the ruling rights of this complete water system, there would definitely be a world-shaking battle. They were all bosses who would be willing to have another person controlling them. Moreover, after the sea area and the water area luck merged, how huge would the luck be? If he could obtain it, it would not be inferior to obtaining a world-shaking fortune. Who would be willing to give it up? Not to mention, if he could control the new water system, it would be equivalent to controlling the entire water vein of the primordial world, and he could become the master of the water vein of the primordial world in one fell swoop. With so many fortunes added together, how could there not be a great war? However, with the current situation of the primordial world, Si Wenming could not care so much. Chapter 674. Opening the connection between the sea and the water would cause a civil war in the water veins. However, if the connection between them was not opened, all the living beings in the primordial world would be finished. For the sake of the common people, Si Wenming had no choice. After all, compared to the common people in the primordial world, Si Wenming would grit his teeth and do it even if he had to sacrifice the entire primordial world's water veins, let alone a civil war in the water veins. He could still tell which was more important between the two. Moreover, after the sea and the water veins were connected, the water veins in the primordial world would be considered complete, forming a complete water veins circulation. Without a doubt, once this was completed, it would definitely be of great benefit to the primordial world. This was an act of boundless merit. Since that was the case, why didn't Si Wenming do it? Moreover, the Dragon Clan was the most firm ally of the human race. If the Dragon Clan could control all the water veins in the primordial world, it would undoubtedly be a great thing for the human race. At that time, the human race could completely help the Dragon Clan. One could suppress the earth, and the other could suppress the water veins. Together, they could maintain the stability of the primordial world. Therefore, in summary, no matter from which perspective, opening the connection between the sea and the water veins would be of great benefit to the human race. In this way, Si Wenming really could not find a reason to refuse this matter. Then, he did it, with a thought. Si Wenming already had an answer in his heart. For the human race, for all living beings in the primordial world. The passage between the sea and the water veins had to be opened so that the weak water could be channeled into the sea to relieve the pressure on the primordial world. After making up his mind, Si Wenming did not hesitate at all. He directly took out the topographic map of the primordial world from the human race's treasure vault, intending to find the most perfect flood passage. However, at the moment when he was ready, a difficult problem suddenly stumped him. That was, he did not have the ability to shake the earth veins. One had to know that if he wanted to open the connection between the water veins and the sea, he had to open a passage between the two. And this, he had to dig deep into the mountains and change the river channels. If it was in the past, moving mountains and filling the sea was naturally extremely simple for an existence at Si Wenming's level. But now, with the establishment of the Heavenly Palace, the power of the primordial world's earth veins had been condensed into one and became extremely difficult to shake. This also made it very difficult for external forces to destroy the existing terrain of the Eldritch world. Therefore, not to mention moving mountains and filling seas, it was difficult to even destroy them. However, if they couldn't move the mountain, it was almost impossible to open up the passage. This was troublesome. For a moment, Si Wenming fell into a dilemma. If they couldn't open up a mountain, then the manpower and material resources needed to open up the passage between the sea areas would be far more than they could imagine. Even if the entire human race was mobilized, it would still take tens of thousands of years. However, how could the current untainted land wait for tens of thousands of years? If that was the case, the entire untainted land would be ruined by the Ruhr water before the passage between the ocean regions could be opened. Therefore, the matter of opening up the passageway could not be delayed. However, if that was the case, the problem would return to the original point. How was he going to shake the earth veins? Is there something calling me? Just as Si Wenming was in a dilemma, an unfamiliar will suddenly came from afar. It was calling out to him from afar, as if it was guiding him to a certain place. What is this? From that call, not only did Si Wenming not feel the slightest bit of malice. On the contrary, he seemed to feel some kindness from it. Moreover, as if he was blessed with good fortune, he had a feeling that this was his opportunity. The treasure that called out to him had the ability to solve his problem. Almost subconsciously, Si Wenming understood the origin of his abnormality. The whim of a cultivator. This was a hint from the heavenly Tao to him that his opportunity had arrived. When he thought of the problem he was facing at this time, how could Si Wenming not understand what his opportunity was? It was definitely a treasure that could help him open up the passage. After understanding this, Si Wenming did not hesitate at all. He directly followed the guidance of the call in his heart and rushed to the unknown place. Every time a great calamity occurred in the world would spontaneously produce a magic treasure that could restrain the calamity to help the common people survive the great calamity. However, the divine object concealed itself. Although the world had produced a treasure that could deal with the calamity, whether the treasure could be found depended on the fortune of all living beings. What was a glimmer of life? This was it. The heavenly Tao was incomplete. Therefore, it left a glimmer of life for all living beings. In other words, although the heavenly Tao left a glimmer of life for all living beings, it was only a glimmer. How difficult would it be to capture him? Fortunately, Si Wenming was not fighting alone. Behind him was the entire human race. Therefore, under Feng Zichen's plan, Si Wenming successfully caught the glimmer of life left by the world for all living beings and formed a connection with the treasure that the world had produced to survive the calamity. In this world, there was no love for no reason, nor was there a good thing that fell from the sky. If it were not for Feng Zichen's plan in the dark, how could such a coincidental thing happen? Si Wenming just lacked something here, and the world on the other side sent it to him? It was Feng Zichen who silently carried everything in the dark in exchange for the bright future of the human race. Following the guidance of the call in his heart, Si Wenming hurriedly ran for several months on the primitive land before arriving at his destination. A canyon with stagnant earth qi. What dense earth vein qi! If it weren't for the protection of the human Tao Emperor's seal, I probably would have been crushed to pieces by the earth vein qi that permeates the canyon as soon as I entered. Looking at the earth vein qi that was almost solid around him, Si Wenming sighed emotionally. Right above his head, the human Tao Emperor's seal floated quietly, shining with dazzling light. Strands of Emperor qi hung down, completely enveloping his body and blocking the earth vein qi that drifted over. It was precisely because of the protection of the human Tao Emperor seal that Si Wenming could make it here safely. Earth vein qi was the essence of the earth. Every strand was equivalent to a huge mountain and abnormally heavy. Countless strands of earth vein qi filled this place. It was like countless huge mountains were pressing down on him. One could imagine the pressure within. With Si Wenming's cultivation before reaching Tai Jingxian, he would probably be crushed to pieces if he touched the earth vein qi. However, the scene before him did not frighten Si Wenming. Instead, it made him more and more excited. The denser the earth vein qi here, the more extraordinary the treasure hidden here was. It was definitely a connate spirit treasure, and its level was not low. Thinking of this, how could Si Wenming not be excited? The strength of the treasure here was related to the success or failure of his plan. The stronger the treasure, the greater the possibility of his plan succeeding, and the shorter the time it would take. As he continued to go deeper, Si Wenming could not help but discover that the earth vein qi around him was even denser. For a moment, he was even more excited about the treasure hidden here. Soon, Si Wenming arrived at the end of the canyon. At this time, the earth vein qi here had completely solidified. It was frighteningly dense, and it was a mysterious yellow color, floating in midair. Mysterious yellow mother qi, the origin qi of heaven and earth. At the end of the canyon, what appeared in front of Si Wenming was a majestic cloud of mysterious yellow mother qi. It floated quietly in the air, emitting an astonishing creation qi around it. What a great creation! Just this cloud of mysterious yellow mother qi alone could refine a supreme-grade creation attribute postnatal spirit treasure. Not to mention, in the center of the mysterious yellow mother qi, there was also a powerful innate spirit treasure that was being nurtured. That's right. The purpose of so much mysterious yellow mother qi was to nurture an innate spirit treasure. An innate spirit treasure that could help the world survive this calamity. The so-called mysterious yellow mother qi was just a companion creature of that innate spirit treasure. This is an axe. Through the mysterious yellow mother qi, Si Wenming saw a huge axe floating inside, constantly absorbing the power of the mysterious yellow mother qi. Is this the thing that's calling me? It's a good treasure, but how should I take it out? Standing in front of the mysterious yellow mother qi, Si Wenming was in a dilemma. From the looks of it, it was obvious that it had not been fully nurtured. If he forcefully broke through the mysterious yellow mother qi and took it out, it would inevitably affect the power of this treasure, causing its power to be greatly reduced. In this case, whether the magic treasure with its power greatly reduced could still break through the earth vein would become a problem. But time waited for no one. If he continued to delay, who knew how many innocent creatures would be harmed by the weak water? It was a matter of life and death. There was no time to delay. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just as Si Wenming was hesitating, the huge axe in the mysterious yellow mother qi seemed to have sensed his arrival and suddenly trembled violently. Then a huge suction force was emitted from the axe, and in the blink of an eye, the mysterious yellow mother qi that enveloped him was completely absorbed. Boom! After absorbing the mysterious yellow mother qi, the axe finally completed its final transformation and was completely born, turning into a ray of divine light and falling into Si Wenming's hand. Mountain-splitting axe? Holding the axe in front of his eyes, Si Wenming looked at it with excitement. The divine axe was entirely green, covered with innate divine patterns, and on the surface of the green axe, a rough map of the wilderness was formed. On the back of the divine axe, there were 2 Tao runes written by the innate divine patterns. Mountain splitting. That was the name of this divine axe, the name that heaven and earth had set for it. Mountain splitting axe, an innate spirit treasure nurtured by the earth vein qi, had 32 innate divine restrictions and was ranked as a top grade. Its ability was, as the name implied, it had the power to split mountains. With this axe, it could easily split the earth vein, and that was what Si Wenming needed. Millions of years ago, with the establishment of the Universal Palace, the earth vein of the wilderness was rejuvenated, and innate spirit treasures and innate life forms were born. And the mountain-splitting axe was one of them. Originally, even if heaven and earth wanted to nurture a top-grade innate spirit treasure, according to normal standards, it would take at least 10 million years. A few million years would at most give birth to an embryo of an innate spirit treasure, which was not enough time for a top-grade innate spirit treasure to be fully nurtured. But even so, the mountain-splitting axe was still born. Of course, there was a problem. Hundreds of years ago, the Daluo Jinxian who destroyed the heavenly embankment and caused the heavenly river to burst its banks. Before the North Star Emperor struck him down into the wilderness, he had said, "Since the heavenly river burst its banks because of you, then make a contribution to quelling the flood." The contribution in his words was referring to the mountain-splitting axe. Normally speaking, it had only been 3 to 4 million years since the mountain-splitting axe was born, and it was not time for it to be born. If it was born by force, its power would definitely be greatly reduced. If that really happened, it would be a blessing in disguise to be able to maintain the middle grade, let alone a superior grade, connate spirit treasure. But now, the wilderness could not wait for the mountain-splitting axe to be born normally. For that, the North Star Emperor had to use special means to forcefully mature it to greatly shorten its birth time. A Daluo Jinxian's origin, together with the innate brand of his innate race, was enough to do that. That's right, the Daluo Jinxian and the innate brand of his race were sent here by the North Star Emperor to become the resources for the mountain-splitting axe to be born. Since the water calamity of the wilderness was caused by him, it was his retribution to use his origin to nourish the treasure to survive the calamity, just as it was to atone for his sins. After putting away the mountain-splitting axe, Si Wenming did not have the mood to stay here any longer. He immediately turned around and left to open his own path to save the world. However, the moment he turned around, he suddenly caught a glimpse of something from the corner of his eye. It completely attracted his attention, and he could not help but stop. Walking forward, Si Wenming picked up the thing that attracted his attention and found that it was a piece of yellow mud. What a strong creation, aura! Could this be the legendary 9-heaven living soil? As soon as Si Wenming's hand touched the dark yellow mud, he felt a huge amount of chi of creation gushing out of the mud and flowing into his body through his palm. In just an instant, his origin, which had been burned by forcefully breaking through the divine chains of order, showed signs of recovery. Moreover, under the influence of the power of creation, even the injuries on his divine soul were healed in the blink of an eye. Boom! As his injuries recovered, a strong aura suddenly rose from Si Wenming's body. His realm was rising steadily. Soon, he rose from the golden immortal realm to the Tai Jinxian realm. After some things had calmed down, although Si Wenming's realm had not recovered to its peak, it had reached the peak of the Tai Jinxian realm. Compared to the half-step Daluo Jinxian at his peak, it was only a little worse. Such a strong creation, aura! This thing is definitely the legendary 9-heaven living soil. But why would such a treasure appear here? After calming his mind, Si Wenming's eyes could not help but burst out with a shocking light. Chapter 675. The 9-heaven living soil. It was also known as the innate earth essence. It was a supreme treasure nurtured by the innate earth elemental Tao and the Tao of creation. At the same time, it was also a supreme treasure of extraordinary significance to the human race. The human race was created by Nuwa gathering the triple light sacred water, supplemented by her own blood essence, and fusing it with the 9-heaven living soil. From this, one could see the significance of the 9-heaven living soil to the human race. This was one of the origins of the human race. Now, this legendary treasure had appeared in front of Si Wenming. How could he not be excited? However, after the excitement, he could not help but feel a little puzzled. Why would such a legendary treasure appear here? Didn't it mean, after Nuwa created humans, the 9-heaven living soil had disappeared from the primordial world? Then why would it appear here, and such a large lump at that? Si Wenming had to be cautious. There were too many experts in the primordial world, and they were too good at scheming. It could be said that they had to take 3 steps before taking 1 step. A casual action would be filled with countless deep meanings, and it could be related to the huge layout of the future. If one was not careful, there was the risk of falling into the schemes of others, causing all one's efforts to be made for others. For this reason, if he could not figure out the origin of the 9-heaven living soil in front of him, then no matter how precious it was, Siwen Ming would not take it away. He could not drag the entire human race into the schemes of the person behind the scenes just because of a moment of greed, losing the big for a small gain. Siwen Ming still could not do it. This item is not the 9-heaven living soil, but its function is similar to the 9-heaven living soil. It is a treasure that I specially prepared for you to help you manage the flood of the primordial world. So, you can take this treasure without worry. You don't have to worry about the schemes behind you. Just as Siwen Ming was hesitating, the ethereal voice of the North Star Emperor suddenly sounded in his ears, dispelling all his doubts. Is this item the work of your majesty? If that's the case, then I'm relieved. After bowing respectfully to the void, Siwen Ming turned around and left. He didn't ask why the North Star was here, nor did he ask why the North Star knew about his plan. The primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian was a realm far beyond his imagination. Every move of such a being was not something he should be able to figure out. At the very least, not now. Siwen Ming, I've given you everything that should be given to you. After that, whether you can successfully pass this tribulation and become the 9th great emperor of the human clan would depend on your own abilities. After Siwen Ming's figure was far away, the North Star Emperor's mutter-like voice faintly sounded and reverberated in the void. The treasure in Siwen Ming's hand was obviously not the 9 heavens life soil. Even if such a treasure had appeared, it shouldn't have appeared here. According to what Gaochen knew, ever since the creation of the world, only 2 pieces of 9 heavens life soil had been born in the primitive world. One was used by Nuwa to create a human, and the other was in the hands of Zhen Yuanzi. Perhaps there was a 3rd piece, but North Star Emperor didn't know about it. As an innate earth elemental supreme treasure, the 9 heavens life soil had unimaginable power. Just 1 grain of it could turn into a continent when it fell into water. Such a treasure. It was truly a supreme treasure to control the flood. However, although the supreme treasure was good, it wasn't in the hands of the human clan. Of course, North Star Emperor could still get the 9 heavens life soil if he was willing to be shameless and ask for it from Zhen Yuanzi. However, if that was the case, the human clan would definitely owe Zhen Yuanzi a huge karma. This was not in line with North Star Emperor's original intention. At this point, unless it was absolutely necessary, North Star Emperor didn't want the human clan to continue to have any relationship with the Great Divines. That would be too troublesome. The Great Divines weren't easy to get along with. If he received a little favor today, he didn't know how much he would have to pay in the future. Therefore, North Star Emperor didn't plan to ask Zhen Yuanzi for the 9 heavens life soil. However, without the 9 heavens life soil, it would be difficult to control the flood. However, this wasn't a problem for North Star Emperor. This was because he had a treasure that wasn't inferior to the 9 heavens life soil. It could replace the 9 heavens life soil. The treasure in his hands that wasn't inferior to the 9 heavens life soil was the flesh and blood of the great divines, as well as the innate origin. Due to the heavenly river's breach, North Star Emperor was enraged. He quickly found the person behind the scenes and killed him. The person behind the scenes was a great divines with the strength of a half-step primordial chaos realm. In the heavenly court, although North Star Emperor crushed the innate, undying, true spirit of the person behind the scenes, his flesh and blood, as well as his innate origin, were left behind by North Star Emperor. What kind of existence was the half-step primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian? If a drop of his blood were to fall on the eldritch world, it would probably turn into a vast river. If a piece of his flesh were to fall on the eldritch world, it would immediately turn into a divine mountain. If his flesh and blood were to be completely released, it could easily evolve into a top-notch great thousand world or a supreme-grade innate spiritual treasure. The value of such an existence had far surpassed the 9 heavens life soil. North Star Emperor wanted to use this item to replace the 9 heavens life soil, a continent formed from the flesh and blood of a half-step primordial chaos realm great divines. Even if Ruoshui was 10 times or 100 times stronger, she wouldn't be able to move it at all. This effect, it was even better than the 9 heavens life soil. Since he had the flesh and blood of a great divines, why would he need to look for the 9 heavens life soil? There was no need at all. The living soil of 9 heaven in Si Wenming's hand was refined by Emperor Gaochen using the flesh and blood origin of the half-step primordial chaos expert. It was because of this that this item had such rich creation chi. Just the aura that it emitted had almost completely healed Si Wenming's injuries. With the strength of a great divines, they could be said to be the carrier of the great Tao. If it hadn't been refined by North Star Emperor, even if it had fallen, just the aura emitted from its body would be enough to kill Si Wenming countless times. Therefore, a trace of the aura of a great divines was an amazing creation for Tai Jingxian. After obtaining the splitting mountain axe and the flesh and blood of the great divines, Si Wenming returned to the human race and started his plan. He wanted to open up the passage between the sea and the water. In order to complete this plan in the shortest time possible, Si Wenming even sent people to the East Sea to ask for help from the dragon race experts. Because, compared to him, the dragon race was undoubtedly more familiar with the primitive water. As for why the dragon race, who was born in the sea, was so familiar with the water, that could only mean that the dragon race had been eyeing the primitive water for a long time. That's right. The luck of the primordial water vein is so great. How can the dragon race not be tempted? In ancient times, as the strongest race in the primitive world, the dragon race focused all their energy on unifying the primitive world. They didn't care about the primitive water vein. When they unified the primitive world, what could they not have? Why would they care about the luck of the water vein? Of course, one of the reasons was that the beast race wouldn't allow the dragon race to touch the primitive water. After the ancient times ended, the dragon race's strength was greatly reduced, and they were no longer able to compete for the primitive world. Only then did they set their eyes on the primitive water. At this time, the witch race rose. The water ancestor, which Gong Gong ruled the entire primitive water in the name of Panga's descendants. Facing such a powerful Gong Gong, the dragon race, whose strength was greatly reduced, naturally couldn't fight against him. Therefore, without a doubt, the dragon race's hope of touching the primitive water was shattered. After the end of the Antiquity Age, the innate gods born in the primitive waters had become another obstacle for the dragon race to invade the primitive waters. Originally, the dragon race was looking for an opportunity to destroy the connate god fiends in the primitive water in one fell swoop, to unify the primitive water. However, before they could find an opportunity, the human race had already come over to invite them to plot the primitive water together. Wasn't this exactly what the dragon race wanted? In that case, how could they not agree? Naturally, they happily ran over to help the human race. Moreover, according to the human race, the passage between the sea and the water was to eliminate the disaster of the weak water in the primitive world so that they could save the people from suffering. This move was meant to save all living beings. Once it was done, there would definitely be merit descending. It was a matter of great merit. For this, not to mention that the human race and the dragon race were allies. Even if they weren't, the dragon race had to come over to help when the human race invited them. After all, no one would complain about having too much merit. Rumble. Just as Si Wenming decided to open up the passage between the sea and the water, in the River of Fate, the destiny that represented the primitive water seemed to have encountered a fatal crisis and suddenly shook violently. For a moment, all the living beings related to the primitive water sensed it. Damn it! Why is the destiny of the water suddenly shaking? Also, why do I have a bad feeling? It's as if a great calamity is coming. In the Huai River, the Wuchi clan, who was in seclusion, suddenly had a feeling that a great calamity was coming. Caught off guard, she woke up from her enlightenment. The warning in her heart, for no reason, made the Wuchi clan vigilant. She began to silently analyze the source of the crisis. Could it be that the dragon race is attacking? However, after thinking about it for a long time, he only suspected the dragon clan. The sudden abnormal fluctuation of the destiny of the primitive water, as well as the inexplicable fear in her heart, all indicated that a great calamity related to the water was about to erupt. However, throughout the history of the water, the only one who could be called an enemy was the dragon race. As one of the few mighty figures in the primitive water, the Wuchi clan naturally knew that the dragon race had been spying on the water for a long time. The reason why they had not made a move until now was that they had not found the right opportunity. Since that was the case, the calamity of the water was very likely to come from the dragon race. Perhaps the countless years of waiting had made the dragon race tired of it. They had decided to send troops to attack the water recently. It was because they sensed the danger that the destiny of the water was turbulent to warn them. Thinking of this, the Wuchi clan felt that it was very reasonable and could not help but believe it. However, that feeling of danger was like a poison attached to the bone, firmly entangling her heart, making her unable to calm down. It seemed to be reminding her that this calamity was far from as simple as she thought. Forget it. Let's go and discuss with the others and see what they have to say. If it's really the dragon clan that's attacking, then I'll let them see what I'm capable of. I'll let them know that we're not to be trifled with, since we've dominated the water realm for so long. In her irritation, the Wuchi clan could not help but roar. Then, she broke through the water surface and flew into the distance. Obviously, she was going to discuss with the others. In the primitive water, it was not that there were no capable people. For example, Hibo of the Yellow River. This innate god-fiend born in the Yellow River had already reached the late stage of sage-to-be. He also had extraordinary achievements in the Tao of innate divination. Therefore, the origin of the calamity of the water was calculated by him. Of course, this was also because Si Wenming and the others did not shield the secrets of heaven. Why did they shield the secrets of heaven? It was not like they were doing bad things. Opening the passage between the sea and the water was a great thing for both the primitive world and all living beings. Since that was the case, why hide it? Of course, it was to show it openly to attract more ambitious people to help. As for whether some people's interests would be lost in this, it was not something that Si Wenming could control. In order to achieve great things, there must be sacrifices. This was unavoidable. And Si Wenming was not willing to sacrifice the human race, so he could only wrong the innate god-fiends of the water. If they were to blame, they could only blame their strength for being too weak. If they were strong enough, after the passage between the sea and the water was opened, the ones who should be afraid should be the dragon race, not them. In order to maintain the rule of the innate god-fiends of the water over the primitive water, it was obviously impossible for Si Wenming to give up the idea of opening the connection between the sea and the water. Damn the human race. How dare they do this? How dare they? In the Yellow River underwater mansion, a group of water mighty figures gathered here. They learned the origin of this great calamity from the Yellow River Earl and could not help but roar angrily. The clans of the water and the human race had always minded their own business and lived in peace for many years. They did not expect that the human race would attack the water. However, this was not important. The important thing was that the human race wanted to open the passage between the sea and the water. To them, this was absolutely intolerable. As the saying goes, all rivers flow into the sea. Once the two were connected, the luck of the water would definitely flow into the sea. This was unavoidable. Although they did not want to admit it, they had to face the truth. The sea was indeed much stronger than the water. Perhaps when Gong Gong was in charge of the primitive water, the power of the water was stronger than the sea. But in their hands, it was not. To be more precise, it was incomparable. They were far from being a match for the dragon race. The reason why the water had been able to block the invasion of the dragon race over the years was that the water had the home advantage. Chapter 676. The Dragon Clan was fighting in an away game and had limited strength. Of course, they were not a match for the water innate god fiends who had the home advantage. It could even be said that the water innate god fiends were the water innate god fiends' greatest protection. Once it was connected to the water innate god fiends, their greatest advantage would be gone. The Dragon Clan could follow the connection between the two and pounce straight at the water innate god fiends, killing or suppressing all the water innate god fiends. Without the home advantage, the water innate god fiends would not have the ability to fight against the Dragon Clan experts. Defeat, this was their only ending. The water innate god fiends is our foundation and our foundation. Once the water innate god fiends are connected to the water innate god fiends, that is, no matter how big the new water innate god fiends is, there will be no place for us to stay. Therefore, everyone, don't hesitate anymore. The time for our survival has come. We must not let the humans' plan succeed. In the Yellow River Water Mansion, a water innate god fiend said with extreme indignation. His words were filled with a strong sense of destruction, although the other water innate god fiends did not say anything. Judging from their attitudes, they probably had similar thoughts. The water innate god fiends. It was really the moment of life and death. In their opinion, the humans' actions were really too much. After the passage between the water innate god fiends was opened, the problem of weak water in the primordial world could be solved. But what about them? After the Dragon Clan controlled the complete water innate god fiends, how could they let them go? Whether it was the Yellow River or the Yangtze River, they were all top existences in the water innate god fiends. They might be far inferior to the sea in size, but the meaning they were given, as well as the merit that nurtured countless living beings on both sides of the river, made them not much inferior to the four seas in terms of status. After the Dragon Clan controlled the complete water innate god fiends, how could they allow such an important place to fall into the hands of outsiders? They were bound to take it for the Dragon Clan. If that was the case, how could the water innate god fiends who originally controlled this place be spared? What awaited them was that they would definitely be eliminated by the Dragon Clan. As for escaping, that was impossible, not to mention that their foundation was here. Even their luck had long merged with the local water luck. Therefore, once they chose to escape, not only would the family business that they had worked so hard for be gone, their luck would also plummet, and they would also form a great karma with this place. At the very least, his strength would plummet, and his providence would be damaged. If it was serious, they would be entangled in karma, and it would be impossible for their cultivation to progress any further. With such a huge price to pay, why would the water domain connate god fiends choose to flee? After all, compared to never being able to increase his cultivation, the threat of death was much lower. For existences above Daluo Jinxian, death was not frightening. What was frightening was not being able to see any hope of improvement. Since they couldn't escape, a fight to the death became their only option. However, it was obviously impossible to fight the dragons head-on. They were no match for the dragons. Then he could only use his wits. The way to outsmart them was simple, and that was to stop the humans' plan. As long as the water domain was not connected to the sea domain, the water domain connate god fiends would still have the home field advantage and would not fear the dragon race. In order to save the countless living beings in the untainted land, the human race decided to open up the passageway between the sea and the water. As for the water domain innate god fiends, they had no choice but to interfere with the humans' actions for the sake of their Tao. On this point, it was impossible to say who was right and who was wrong. It could only be said that their positions were different. However, history was often written by the victors. The final victor of this battle would definitely be the right side, and the loser would be nailed to the pillar of shame in history. Everyone, let's make our move. Now that the weak water in the untainted land is flooding, the luck of the water domain has soared. From this, it can be seen that the will of heaven is still on us. Moreover, this is our last chance. Once we miss this opportunity, when the passageway between the sea domain and the water domain is completely connected, we will have no hope. After a long silence, the strongest water domain connate God-fiend, River Earl Yellow River, spoke slowly. River Earl is right. We have no way out. We will die if we retreat, and we will die if we fight. Then why don't we fight to our heart's content? We can show the might of the untainted land and let the humans and dragons know that the Water Clan is not easy to bully. As soon as River Earl Yellow River finished speaking, the irritable Wuchi could not help but express his stance. After all, he was a monkey. It was inevitable that he was impatient. Impatient. Wasn't that what they said? Yes, the monkey is right. We have to fight this battle and we have to win it. After Wuchi, the rest of the water domain connate God-fiends also expressed their stance. They had no way to retreat, so they could only face the enemy head-on. Good. Since no one has any objections, after I leave, you can return to your own water domain and raise the flood to destroy the plan of the humans. Seeing that no one had any objection, Yellow River Earl made the final decision. It was the final conclusion of this matter. Yes. Everyone replied and then dispersed, just as River Earl Yellow River said, although it was a matter of life and death for the water domain connate God-fiends. It was also the best opportunity for them. After all, the weak water was also a kind of water. After it fell into the untainted land, it turned into a monstrous flood. Therefore, while it brought disaster to the untainted land, it also indirectly increased the luck of the water domain. There were floods everywhere in the untainted land. It could be said that the luck of the water domain had reached its peak. Under such circumstances, the water domain connate God-fiends would also receive unprecedented blessings when fighting with others. They would often be able to erupt with unimaginable combat strength. For example, with the blessings of luck, the restrictions of the Sea of Laws would not be as strong on them as before. They would be able to erupt with power that far exceeded that of a golden immortal for a short period of time. This was the most direct benefit of having a strong providence, not to mention the passive enhancement of turning misfortunes into blessings and going out to pick up treasures. If nothing unexpected happened, this would be the highlight of the water domain connate God-fiends. Perhaps it would also be their last moment. Under the secret push of the water domain connate God-fiends, the flood in the untainted land became more and more serious. This also forced Si Wenming and the others to start their plan in advance. Just like that, the battle between the humans and the water domain connate God-fiends broke out suddenly. In fact, it was more appropriate to call it a battle between the dragons and the water domain connate God-fiends than a battle between the humans and the water domain connate God-fiends. This was because the main force fighting the water domain connate God-fiends were the experts of the dragons. After all, the humans were a land race. They were far inferior to the water domain connate God-fiends in terms of water battle, let alone the dragons. If the humans really fought the water domain connate God-fiends in the water, they would have to pay a terrible price even if they won. It was really not worth it. It was better to let the dragons, who are also of the water domain, deal with them. This would save a lot of effort compared to the humans. Just as the battle between the humans and the water domain connate God-fiends was in full swing, two people in the Demon Master Hall of the Northern Underworld were watching the dispute with inexplicable expressions. Daoist Zichen, the humans are now fighting with the water domain connate God-fiends. Don't you plan to lend a hand? Patriarch Kunpeng suddenly asked the North Star Emperor, who was beside him. Lend a hand? Why should I? The water domain connate God-fiends are just like ants. Not to mention the humans, even the dragons can destroy them. Not to mention the two races joining forces. The destruction of the water domain connate God-fiends is a foregone conclusion. The North Star Emperor shook his head and said disdainfully, "The water domain Khanate god fiends might seem powerful, but they did not even have a single top-notch great divination god fiends. Why would the North Star Emperor care about them? The only purpose of their existence was to be a whetstone for the humans to sharpen their skills. Sigh, what a pity. These water deities are not bad." After hearing the North Star Emperor's words, Patriarch Kunping could not help but sigh and said regretfully, as a member of the water domain Khanate god fiends, he could not help but cherish their talents when he saw them in trouble. Therefore, he purposely tried to sound them out and see if he could save them from the North Star Emperor. However, the result was undoubtedly disappointing. The North Star Emperor had already arranged the destruction of the water domain Khanate god fiends. What's a pity. When they became enemies with the humans, they were destined to be destroyed. Anyone who goes against the humans will not be able to escape the fate of destruction, the North Star Emperor said with a smile. However, his voice was extremely ear-piercing when it fell into Patriarch Kunping's ears. What an arrogant statement! What did he mean by anyone who dared to go against the humans would not be able to escape the fate of destruction? Was this a warning to him? If not for the fact that he was no match for the person in front of him, Patriarch Kunping really wanted to immediately activate the Demon Master Hall and suppress him on the spot. Unfortunately, he did not dare, because the other party had the ability to kill him. Once upon a time, they were once on the same level. But now, the gap between them was getting bigger and bigger. The purpose of the person in front of him coming to the Northern Underworld was to warn him not to act rashly while the humans were being attacked from both sides. With his own strength, he suppressed the entire Northern Underworld demon clan so much that they did not dare to move. This man was so domineering. Sigh. He was weaker than him. He could only do so. See, Wenming, are you really prepared for the upcoming calamity? The North Star Emperor knew what Patriarch Kunping was thinking, but he did not care, because the gap between them was too big. Moreover, he did not have the time to think about Patriarch Kunping. At the moment, he was worried about Si Wenming. It was inevitable that the problem of the weak water would be solved. The passageways between the sea areas would also be connected. There was nothing to worry about, because this was what the Heavenly Tao hoped for. The Heavenly Tao hoped that these things would come true. When Si Wenming took action, he would naturally have the help of the heavens. How could he fail? Therefore, the struggle of the water lineage was extremely laughable in the eyes of the North Star Emperor. If they tried to fight against the general trend and go against the heavens, they would definitely end up being smashed into pieces. They were really a group of muddle-headed people who could not see the general trend clearly. However, that was not necessarily the case. Perhaps they had already seen the general trend clearly, but they were just unwilling to believe it. Therefore, they planned to go against the heavens. But no matter what, it could not change the outcome of their failure. After controlling the flood of the primordial world and piercing through the passageways between the sea areas, the primordial world's water veins were unified. Si Wenming, who had done these two things, would definitely receive a lot of merit, and this was his capital to become an emperor. If nothing unexpected happened, when Si Wenming's term was completed, he would naturally become the 9th great emperor of the human race. However, this was what the North Star Emperor was worried about. If he was not wrong, the moment before Si Wenming became an emperor, his death tribulation would come. And this tribulation would be the greatest tribulation that Si Wenming would face in his life. There was almost no possibility of passing it, because this tribulation was a killing tribulation from the Heavenly Tao. There was no way to avoid it. There was no way to hide. He could only stand up and face the tribulation. The Heavenly Tao had set a great trend for the human race. There were only 8 great emperors, and there could only be 8 of them. If the human race insisted on giving birth to the 9th great emperor, then this action would undoubtedly be in defiance of the heavens. And in defiance of the heavens, there would definitely be a price to pay. The heavenly Tao's killing came for this reason, to cut off all the paths of survival for those who defied the heavens. In other words, once Si Wenming chose to become an emperor, then he would face the killing intent of the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao was invisible, so its methods were also invisible. It would appear in all kinds of ways, but without a doubt, every method of the heavenly Tao was extremely powerful. It was definitely not something that Si Wenming could contend against. Even if he had merit, it would not be possible. At most, it could protect his true spirit from destruction and leave a chance of survival for him. God, how could it be so easy to defy? If it was so easy to defy the heavens, wouldn't the primordial world be in a mess? Therefore, the day Si Wenming became an emperor was the day his life would end. Gao Qin was worried about this. In front of the heavenly Tao, even someone as powerful as him did not have much confidence in protecting Si Wenming. This tribulation was difficult, unless Si Wenming chose not to become an emperor. Then he would have endless glory and become the greatest king below the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Moreover, his cultivation base would directly enter the realm of the perfected quasi-saint with the help of merit. He would not be much weaker than the 5 emperors. But would Si Wenming really refuse to become an emperor? Gao Qin did not know the answer to this point. The only thing he could do was to support Si Wenming unconditionally no matter which path he chose. Because of the Khanate cardinal treasure, the human Tao emperor seal, even the Khanate god fiends of the water lineage could not do anything to Si Wenming. Therefore, the water lineage was defeated by the allied forces of the human and dragon races. The luck that belonged to the water lineage was also devoured by the 2 races. Rumble. At a certain moment, the river of destiny suddenly shook violently. It was the luck of the human race that reached its peak after devouring the water lineage's luck. It broke the seal of the divine chains of order in one fell swoop. With a boom, a supreme power came from the void and poured into Si Wenming's body. Author's note: 12,000 words completed, begging for a monthly pass, begging for a subscription. Chapter 677. Whoosh, the void shattered silently. An extremely powerful aura erupted from Si Wenming and swept across the sky and earth in an instant. That was the power of the human clan's fortune had returned. In just an instant, with the blessing of the human clan's fortune, Si Wenming's strength returned from the complete Tai Jinxian to the complete Sage-to-Be. He stood at the peak of the Eldritch world again. The invincible human emperor of the Eldritch world had returned. Without a doubt, the end of the Water Clan had arrived. Even with the blessing of the Water Clan's fortune, they could unleash strength far beyond that of a golden immortal. However, they had no chance of winning against Si Wenming, who was at the complete Sage-to-Be, because the complete Sage-to-Be was far beyond their strength at their peak. They were no match for Si Wenming even at their peak, let alone now when they were restricted by the world. From this moment on, the fate of the Water Clan's Khanate divine demons was sealed. After Si Wenming's strength had recovered, he quickly suppressed the Water Clan's Khanate divine demons who were causing trouble. However, perhaps due to guilt or kindness, Si Wenming did not kill the Water Realm innate divine demons after defeating them. Instead, he sealed them away. Think about it. Si Wenming didn't seem to like killing along the way. Those who went against him were all suppressed and sealed by him. None of them lost their lives. He didn't kill. Perhaps this was his persistence. Without the obstruction of the Water Clan's Khanate divine demons, it became much easier to open up the passage between the sea regions. Holding the splitting mountain axe, Si Wenming broke open the mountains that obstructed the flow of the sea regions and gradually opened up a passage to the sea regions. However, when he broke open a mountain, he found a Khanate divine cauldron in the mountain. The Khanate cauldron of creation, a supreme-grade Khanate spiritual treasure with 45 Khanate divine seals in it. It had reached the limit of a connate spiritual treasure. It was the top connate spiritual treasure. As for the connate cauldron of creation, it had an extraordinary origin. It might not be famous in the eldritch world, but its brother was famous in the eldritch world. That's right. The brother of the cauldron of creation was the cauldron of heaven and earth, which belonged to goddess Nuwa. These two treasures were the remains of a top-grade chaos spiritual artifact, the Chaos Cauldron. Back then, the Chaos Cauldron was shattered by the heaven-splitting divine axe. Its main body was broken into two pieces, one large and one small, and fell into the new, untainted world. Among them, the larger fragment had been tainted with the aura of the Tao of heaven and earth and had transformed into the connate cardinal treasure, the cauldron of heaven and earth. After changing hands several times, it finally fell into the hands of Her Highness Nuwa. On the other hand, the small fragment was tainted with the aura of the Tao of creation. It transformed into a supreme-grade connate spirit treasure, the connate cauldron of creation, and vanished into the primeval world. In the untainted land, there were more than one or two people who were interested in this top-level spiritual treasure of creation Tao. As a result, for a period of time, there were powerful beings everywhere searching for the whereabouts of this treasure, but the result was undoubtedly disappointing. No matter how hard they tried, they could not find any trace of the primordial cauldron of creation. Over time, they gave up, and no one searched for the whereabouts of the primordial cauldron of creation. He had never thought that the treasure that no one had been able to find countless years ago would be found so easily by the human race. It had to be said that it was fate. Si Wenming was naturally very excited to obtain the supreme grade connate spirit treasure, the primordial cauldron of creation. But the current situation did not allow him to be excited, nor did it allow him to study the primordial cauldron of creation. In the untainted land, there were still countless people waiting for him to save. How could he waste too much time on the primordial cauldron of creation at this time? Therefore, after Si Wenming did a simple acknowledgement of the primordial cauldron of creation, he put it aside and continued to fight for the cause of saving the people. With Si Wenming's strength in the great perfection of Sage to Be and the upper grade connate spirit treasure, the splitting mountain axe, he could easily open up the passage between the sea regions. For this reason, in less than 100 years, the passage between the sea regions was opened up. The Ruo water that was all over the untainted land flowed towards the great sea through this passage. Boom! Just as the sea regions were connected to the great sea regions, a huge roar suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. Then heaven and earth seemed to have changed. There were many wonderful and unknown changes. Even the invisible laws of the great Tao had become much more active. However, no matter what, although these changes were confusing, they were undoubtedly good and beneficial to all living beings. What was different from the untainted land was the changes in the East Sea. If the changes in the untainted land were gentle, then the changes in the East Sea were undoubtedly much more intense. Boom! 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 The sea seemed to be roaring, setting off huge waves one after another. Moreover, the spiritual energy in the sea was also slowly increasing, which was a sign that the origin was thickening. The sea had become stronger. And all of this was caused by the great perfection of the untainted land's water veins, after the sea regions were connected to the great perfection of the water veins. The fluctuation of the water veins lasted for hundreds of years before it calmed down. And as the water veins calmed down, the flood that affected the entire untainted land also disappeared. The flooding Ruo water flowed towards the East Sea through the passage between the sea regions. At this moment, the direction of the primordial water veins could truly be said to be 100 rivers returning to the sea. The great cycle of the primordial water veins was completed, and the flood on the ground was also resolved. It was time for Si Wenming, who had facilitated these two things, to reap the rewards. Rumble. In the sky, resplendent golden light gathered and turned into a rain of light that fell towards the primordial land. Among them, more than 70% of the luck fell into Si Wenming's hands. As for the remaining 30%, 20% fell into the hands of the human experts and dragon experts who followed Si Wenming to deal with the flood and open the passage. The last 10% fell into the tools that Yu the Great used to control the flood. For example, the weapon used by a monkey that had caused trouble in the heavenly palace in the future, the sea-calming divine needle. The tools to control the flood that had obtained merit were such treasures. Quelling the disaster of the untainted land in one fell swoop caused Si Wenming's prestige in the untainted land to rise. He was about to catch up with the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors and become the 9th great emperor of the human race. In fact, in the untainted land, the voice of Si Wenming being the 9th great emperor of the human race had already appeared. For a time, the untainted land was filled with the names of Yu the Great, King Yu and Emperor Yu, and these were all honorific titles for Si Wenming. Yu was Si Wenming's name because he had saved countless living beings. It was inappropriate for everyone to address him as the human emperor. After all, every clan leader of the human race could be called the human emperor. However, not every human emperor was called Si Wenming. Therefore, the people of the world crowned Si Wenming's name with a word to distinguish him from the other human emperors. The name Yu the Great came from this, and to himself, explained everything. Throughout the history of the untainted land, how many people could add the word in front of their names? There were only a few people. As for King Yu and Emperor Yu, they were honorific titles for Si Wenming. The praises of the world did not make Yu lose himself and become arrogant. That was because he knew that compared to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, he still had many shortcomings. If he wanted to become an emperor, he still needed to become even more outstanding. As the human emperor, he still had a lot of room for improvement. The martyrs of the human race had been urging him. The glorious Yu had become even more diligent than before. Just like that, there were still many troubles waiting for him. From a certain point of view, the situation that Yu faced was even more complicated and difficult than the period of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. That was because the period of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors was the period when the primordial world transformed from the pre-celestial era to the post-celestial era. At that time, although the amount of pre-celestial spiritual energy in the world was getting smaller and smaller, it was not completely gone. For this reason, the human race of that era could easily cultivate to the pre-celestial realm and become human immortals. In other words, in the era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, although the environment of the world was gradually deteriorating, the main body of the human race was still cultivators. However, in the era of Yu, the world had completely become the post-celestial era. In other words, if cultivators wanted to cultivate now, it would not be as easy as before. In the past, the human race could easily cultivate to the pre-celestial realm, but now the human race could only cultivate to the post-celestial realm. After that, the post-celestial realm had become a threshold that most people could not cross. However, in the post-celestial realm, other than having a little more strength, was there any difference between them and mortals in other aspects? No. To be precise, post-celestial realm cultivators still belonged to the category of mortals. The world had changed. The main body of the human race was no longer cultivators, but mortals. Compared to cultivators, mortals had a lot more things to do. That was because they were weak, very weak. Any ferocious beast or demonic beast could easily kill a large number of mortals. And because they had become the protagonists of the world, the flesh and blood of the human race was inevitably tainted with some of the Tao of heaven and earth. This also caused the human race to become a delicious cake in the eyes of foreign races. As long as they devoured the flesh and blood of the human race, they could quickly increase their strength. In the face of such a temptation, even if the human race was the protagonist of the world, it could not dissuade those foreign races who coveted the flesh and blood of the human race. Not to mention, over the years, many races had been wiped out by the human race. It was inevitable that some fish had escaped the net. And how could these existences be afraid of the human race? They could not wait for the human race to die. That was the truth. If such a foreign race discovered that devouring the flesh and blood of the human race could quickly increase their strength, how could they not attack the human race? Therefore, in the primordial world, there would often be incidents of human tribes being massacred. In the face of such a situation, even if the human race used iron-blooded methods and slaughtered several tribes, they could not stop it. After all, the temptation of increasing one's strength was too great. It was enough to make people completely lose themselves and fall into the demonic path. What worried you the Great was this. The human tribes were massacred one after another. As the human emperor, you the Great naturally had an unshirkable responsibility. But in this situation, even someone as powerful as him had no other way. He could not keep staring at the human race, right? This was unrealistic. But even if there was no other way, he could not continue to let this kind of thing happen, right? To be honest, if the ones who died were cultivators, you the Great would not be so angry. When cultivators fought with others and were killed by others because their skills were inferior, no one could say anything about it. However, the ones who were massacred were mortals. This undoubtedly made you the Great extremely angry. One had to know that mortals were the foundation of the human race. It was precisely because the human race had a large base that they could provide an endless stream of experts for the human race. The situation of the human race was a classic example of insufficient quality. They had to make up for it with quantity and used to trigger a qualitative change. For this, if the human race did not care about the lives and deaths of mortals, causing the number of mortals of the human race to be greatly reduced, it would not be long before the human race declined. Therefore, mortals were the bottom line of the human race. Any existence who dared to slaughter mortals would be the mortal enemy of the human race. They would kill everyone they saw. There are even some who would pull out the forces behind them. However, no matter how angry you the Great was, no matter how cruel the human race's methods were, there were endless existences who dared to slaughter mortals in the primordial world. The pursuit of strength had already caused many living beings in the primordial world to develop a sick mentality. In order to pursue strength, they did not hesitate to pay any price. Even if they offended the human race and gave up their lives, they would not hesitate. Although you the Great was strong enough to wipe out all the living beings in the primordial world, he could not erase the desire for strength of all living beings. The desire for strength was something engraved in the bones of all living beings. It was innate like an instinct. No one could erase it from the hearts of all living beings. Therefore, you the Great could not stop the foreign races from killing mortals, and neither could the human race. The only thing they could do was to protect the mortals so that they would not become the victims of the foreign race's pursuit of strength. Protect. After meditating in the ancestral temple for 100 years, you the Great finally found a way to solve the problem of the human race from the innate cauldron of creation. He wanted to use the innate cauldron of creation as the foundation to create an array formation that could cover the entire human race and protect the mortals inside. Yes, protect the mortals. The array formation that only protected the mortals did not have any effect on cultivators. According to you the Great's plan, as long as he set up this array formation to protect the mortals, from now on, any existence that dared to attack the mortals would be attacked by the innate cauldron of creation. Over time, more and more foreign races would die, and there would not be any situation where the foreign races slaughtered the mortals. In this way, wouldn't the safety of the mortals be guaranteed? Moreover, this array formation was only targeted at mortals and had no effect on cultivators. Even in the array formation, cultivators could still do whatever they wanted like before. However, from now on, they could not casually attack the human race. This array formation was the protective umbrella of the mortals. It protected the mortals so that they could live a stable life in this era where cultivators ran amok and immortals and gods appeared. This idea is good. If it really succeeds, then the foundation of the human race will not have to worry about in the future. In the ancestral temple, the more you the Great thought about it, the more he felt that this plan was feasible. It was enough to lay an everlasting foundation for the human race. As long as there were no problems with the mortals, there would be an endless stream of human experts. Thus, he would not have to worry about the problem of the lack of experts. With this thought, Yu the Great made up his mind and began to take action. The first thing he had to do was to have a detailed understanding of the human territory so that it would be convenient for him to build the array formation. Thus, Yu the Great began his trip to the human territory. After 1,000 years, Yu the Great traveled to every corner of the human race and finally had a detailed plan in his heart. He planned to first divide the human territory into 9 parts and call them the 9 provinces. Then he would divide the innate cauldron of creation into 9 parts and bury them in the 9 provinces. Finally, with the 9 cauldrons as the foundation, he would set up a formation that could cover the entire human territory and protect the mortals within. Then it would be considered a success. Of course, if he could capture 9 extremely powerful existences and seal them into the 9 cauldrons as the eye of the formation, that would undoubtedly be even better. Because in this way, the power of the formation would definitely increase greatly and be able to protect the safety of the mortals to the greatest extent. Moreover, there was another benefit to doing this. That was, as time passed, the powerful existences that were sealed in the 9 cauldrons would slowly be refined and become a part of the 9 cauldrons. In this way, the origins of the 9 supremes would definitely be strengthened. If they were to add the merit of protecting the mortals, when they were combined in the future, they might be able to advance further and become innate supreme treasures. If that was really the case, then the human race would have 2 innate supreme treasures. Their strength would definitely increase greatly, and their status would become more and more stable. It had to be said that Yu the Great's plan was perfect. The innate cauldron of creation was originally formed from the fragments of a top-grade chaos spirit treasure. Its quality was abnormally high, far surpassing innate spirit treasures and not much inferior to innate supreme treasures. It was also because of his bad luck that he obtained too little innate creation origin. That was why it did not evolve into an innate supreme treasure like his brothers. Instead, it became a supreme grade innate spirit treasure. However, this did not mean that the innate cauldron of creation would always be a supreme grade innate spirit treasure. It had the possibility of becoming an innate supreme treasure. What Yu the Great wanted to do was to turn that possibility into reality. If he really succeeded, then after devouring the origins of the 9 powerful existences and the merit of protecting the mortals, the possibility of the innate cauldron of creation advancing to an innate supreme treasure was extremely high. As for why it was not 100%, the key was what realm the 9 powerful existences that were suppressed were in. If it was Daluo Jinxian, then it would probably be very difficult for the innate cauldron of creation to advance to an innate supreme treasure. However, if it was a sage-to-be, then after a long period of time, the innate cauldron of creation had a great chance of advancing to an innate supreme treasure. If it was 9 powerful existences that were suppressed by the 9 cauldrons, then the innate cauldron of creation would definitely advance to an innate supreme treasure. In short, the stronger the existence that was suppressed, the higher the possibility of the innate cauldron of creation advancing to an innate supreme treasure. Chapter 678. Just as Yu the Great was about to set up the 9 provinces barrier, a change occurred in the Purple Cloud Palace, in the chaos outside the sky. All right, you've stayed here long enough. Leave this place and return to the primordial world. After preaching for 10,000 years, Tao ancestor Hong Jun suddenly stopped preaching and asked everyone to leave. Thank you, Master, Teacher. Feng Zichen and the other 6 people came back to their senses. They bowed to Ancestor Hongjun. Then they left the Purple Cloud Palace one by one as he said. Humph! Outside the Purple Cloud Palace, Feng Zichen and the 3 Pure Ones looked at each other. They wanted to see the 2 of them hate each other. After snorting coldly, they each used their magic and rushed to the primordial world. It had been a long time. They had not returned to the primordial world. It should have been hundreds of thousands of years. Whoosh, whoosh, a purple light flashed, and the chaos outside the sky flew away behind Feng Zichen, causing him to get closer and closer to the primordial world. During this process, everything that had happened in the primordial world over the years quickly appeared in Feng Zichen's mind so that he could understand the situation of the primordial world as quickly as possible. As the Tao field of the Tao ancestor, the Purple Cloud Palace itself was an unimaginable treasure. Its power could be said to be unparalleled. In it, Feng Zichen and the 6 saints were completely cut off from the primordial world. In other words, during the time when they were listening to the Tao in the Purple Cloud Palace, Feng Zichen and the 6 saints were out of contact. They did not know anything about the changes in the primordial world over the years. Therefore, the first thing they had to do as soon as they left the Purple Cloud Palace was to understand the current situation of the primordial world so that they could make reasonable arrangements for the next step. The disaster of the weak water. The change of the water vein. Over the years, Si Wenming has done well. It seems that it won't be long before he can take that crucial step. On the way to the primordial world, Feng Zichen could not help but nod his head in relief after learning about what Yu the Great had done. Yu the Great, it did not disappoint. He was no worse than the human emperor before him. However, after feeling gratified, Feng Zichen could not help but feel a little worried. Looking at Yu's posture, it was obvious that he was rushing to become an emperor. However, how was he going to resist the heavenly Tao's killing tribulation after that? Facing the killing intent of the heavenly Tao. But not only did it require courage, it also required great strength. In the past, although Feng Zichen had several heaven-defying experiences, his heaven-defying actions were all for the good of the untainted world. Therefore, the punishment given to him by the heavenly Tao was basically just a formality. Not only did it not cause any harm, but it also brought him a lot of benefits. However, Yu the Great was different. His heaven-defying act was to become the 9th great emperor of the human race. This was undoubtedly a good thing for the human race, but it was not necessarily the case for the untainted world. Although the heavenly Tao wanted the human race to be the protagonist of the world, if the human race was too powerful, it was not what the heavenly Tao wanted to see. The lesson of the Magi and demons was right in front of him. The heavenly Tao no longer allowed such a powerful force to appear in the untainted world. For this, if the human race appeared too powerful, the heavenly Tao would suppress them. And Yu the Great becoming the 9th great emperor of the human race was a sign that the human race was too powerful. In this way, it would naturally attract the suppression of the heavenly Tao. It would destroy Yu the Great and destroy the possibility of the 9th great emperor of the human race. The human race could be strong, but this strength had to be under the rules of the heavenly Tao. Forget it. Right now, we can only take one step at a time. However, even if I face the heavenly Tao, at the very least, I have to protect Yu the Great's life when the killing tribulation erupts. After thinking for a moment, Feng Zichen made a decision. Facing the heavenly Tao, even someone as powerful as him could not guarantee that he could help Yu the Great survive the death tribulation. However, he was confident that he could protect Yu the Great's life in front of the heavenly Tao. Swoosh! In just a few years, Feng Zichen rushed back to the untainted world from the chaos outside the heavens. Since he had returned to the untainted world, the rest of the journey was much simpler. Boom! Feng Zichen stretched out his hand and directly tore through the void and stepped into it. Then, when his figure appeared again, he had already returned to the Emperor Star. Oh, why did the rules of heaven and earth change? Even the restrictions of the Sea of Law on the great divine masters are much smaller. As soon as he returned to the Emperor Star, Feng Zichen did not have time to rest when he suddenly realized that the rules of heaven and earth in the untainted world had changed. The restrictions on the great divine masters were disappearing at an extremely fast speed. If this continued, it would not be long before the great divine masters could attack wantonly in the untainted world. What's going on? With a swoosh, Feng Zichen stood up from the emperor's throne and sized up the untainted world with a look of surprise and bewilderment. Although if the great divine masters attacked at all costs, it would be difficult for the Sea of Law to restrict them. However, the existence of the Sea of Law still had some effect. At the very least, it could make them worry. But what was going on now? The influence of the Sea of Law on the great divine masters was gradually disappearing. Wasn't this equivalent to encouraging them to attack in the untainted world in disguise? There was a problem. There was definitely a problem. While feeling puzzled, Feng Zichen could not help but use his methods to deduce. He originally thought that this deduction would be very difficult, but as soon as he started, Feng Zichen realized that it was not the case at all. He easily deduced the reason for the change in the untainted world. However, this answer was obviously difficult for him to accept. 9 cauldrons, 9 provinces. This is the trend of setting up the 9 provinces barrier. The 9 provinces barrier. You have finally come to this step. After a long silence, Feng Zichen muttered. Without a doubt, the changes in the untainted world this time were related to the 9 provinces barrier that he was going to set up. Once the 9 provinces barrier was set up, the luck of the human race would definitely soar again. As the human emperor, Dio would definitely benefit from it. With the push of luck, he might be able to push him to the position of the 9th great emperor of the human race in one fell swoop, thus completely perfecting his great emperor Tao fruit. However, in this way, the heavenly Tao would definitely not tolerate it. Therefore, after the heavenly Tao sensed this situation, he decisively made a move. Removing the restrictions of the Sea of Law on the great divine masters was the first step of the heavenly Tao's action. He wanted to use the hands of the great divine masters to get rid of Diyu, the human emperor who planned to go against the heavens. If the great divine masters could not do this, then perhaps the saints would personally make a move, or perhaps the heavenly Tao would personally make a move. We're in big trouble. On the Emperor Star, after learning about the changes, Feng Zichen could not help but frown. He had still underestimated the determination of the heavenly Tao. In order to prevent the human race from giving birth to the 9th great emperor, he did not hesitate to release the restrictions on the great divine masters. It was truly a ruthless method. He wanted to cut off all of Diyu's hopes. Of course, the heavenly Tao might have the intention of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys by making such a big move. If it was just to deal with the human race, there was naturally no need for such a big move. However, if it was to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys, then it might not be the case. It was estimated that the heavenly Tao wanted to use thunderous methods to kill Diyu and intimidate the existences that he wanted to defy the heavens. For example, the great divine masters. It had been a long time since the heavenly Tao had appeared in the primordial world. It was estimated that many existences had forgotten the methods of the heavenly Tao and had developed some thoughts that they should not have. The heavenly Tao had probably expected this. Therefore, it planned to use this opportunity to punish the human race to show its muscles and show its presence. From there, it would have the effect of intimidating people. It would also allow the great divine masters to re-establish their fear of the heavenly Tao. This time, Diyu's luck was probably bad. He had become the chicken that the heavenly Tao used to make an example out of, establishing dominance. Killing Diyu to establish dominance. However, even if he understood this, Feng Zichen could not do anything. He could not run over and say to the heavenly Tao, "Find someone else to establish your dominance, right?" Wouldn't that be stupid? Sigh. My head hurts. Diyu is really in danger this time. Sighing, Feng Zichen felt helpless for the first time in a long time. Diyu's death tribulation was not easy to pass. Now that the heavenly Tao had the intention of using him to establish its dominance, it was even more difficult to pass. The danger factor had directly increased by several times. His chances of survival were slim, unless Diyu was willing to give up becoming the great emperor of the human race. In that case, he would no longer be a heaven-defying person. He would be a rare person of great merit in the primordial world who could receive a huge boost. However, up until now, from the fact that Diyu still did not stop setting up the barrier of the 9 provinces, one could see his determination. He would not give up. This move was not to become the great emperor of the human race, but for the millions of mortals of the human race. The people protected by the boundary of the 9 states were those ordinary mortals. If Diyu gave up on setting up the barrier of the 9 provinces at this time, then those innocent mortals would continue to be slaughtered by the foreign races. And this scene was definitely not what Diyu wanted to see. How could Diyu be a person who cherished his life? Compared to the lives of countless people, Diyu's life was nothing. If he could use his death to exchange for the safety of countless people, then why would Diyu be afraid of death? He had set up the barrier of the 9 provinces. Even if he died for this, Diyu would accept it. In short, for the human race, Diyu had no regrets. Now, what insisted Diyu to continue was no longer the obsession to become an emperor, but the lives of countless people. For the sake of all living beings, he had no way out. Forget it. Let me accompany you in your madness. Shaking his head and sighing, Feng Zichen said helplessly. However, his face was full of smiles. He understood Diyu's thoughts, because if it were him, Feng Zichen, in Diyu's position, he would also make the same choice as Diyu. After all, they were the emperors of the human race. The human emperor not only represented glory, but also a huge responsibility. As the human emperor, even if he could not make his people invincible in the world, he had to at least provide them with a safe living environment. This was the most basic condition of being an emperor. After making up his mind, Feng Zichen did not hesitate. He directly used Hongmeng Daozhong to shield his aura. Then he quietly went to Nua's palace to discuss with Nua. It was obviously not enough for him to help Diyu alone, and if he obtained the support of Nua, then the pressure on him would undoubtedly be much less. As for whether Nua would stand on his side in this matter, Feng Zichen was still very confident. Today, the relationship between Nua and the human race had long become inseparable, not to mention that the human race was a race that she had created. The stronger the human race was, the more benefits she would get. Her elder brother, Fuxi, was the head of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of the human race. He had long been tied to the chariot of the human race. From this point alone, Nua had a reason to help the human race. Her involvement with the human race was so deep that it could not be cut off. Not to mention what Feng Zichen and Nua talked about. Not long after he left, the North Star Emperor suddenly returned to the heavenly court and released his aura without hiding. Rumble. An extremely overbearing aura spread out in all directions with the heavenly court as the center. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire Eldritch universe. In an instant, all the living beings in the Eldritch universe could feel the oppression that belonged to the primordial chaos Tao Master. All of them trembled under this power. Humph! Is this a warning to us? Unlike the other living beings, the great mediums of the great desolate world all had ugly expressions on their faces when they felt the might of the North Star Emperor. That was because they knew that the North Star Emperor had released his aura without hiding his intention. It was obvious that he was warning them. He was warning them not to attack Diyu. He was still around. If they were to make a move against you the Great, These powerful beings would have to consider if they could withstand the revenge of the North Star Emperor. Being threatened in such a brazen manner, the great medium who were usually arrogant were, of course, unhappy. But so what? Just like what they had shown. In the face of the North Star Emperor's threat, other than sighing and feeling angry, they could only swallow their anger. After all, the gap between them was too big. After being threatened by the North Star Emperor, everyone was infuriated. However, they secretly restrained their actions. If the primordial Chaos Daluo Jinxian, who was supported by the supreme karmic rank of heaven and earth, really wanted to take revenge on someone, even the sages would have a headache, let alone the great medium. Of course, some of the great medium were not willing to be threatened by the North Star Emperor. However, they were no match for him. Therefore, they could only place their hopes on the three pure ones, hoping that they would take action to suppress the arrogance of the North Star Emperor. However, the result was undoubtedly disappointing. That was because the three pure ones had not done anything since the beginning. Even though the North Star Emperor's oppression had swept across the entire Eldritch universe, the sacred ground where the three sages were at was still the same as before. There was no movement at all. It was as though the three pure ones had not returned. In this case, the Eldritch universe might be peaceful for a while. In the heavenly court, the North Star Emperor slowly retracted his aura. Actually, there was no need for him to do that. That was because even if he did not warn everyone, no one would dare to take action against Yu the Great. Although Yu the Great wanted to do something that defied the heavens, he had not done it yet. It could be said that as long as Yu the Great did not do anything that defied the heavens, he would still be a person of great merit in the Eldritch universe. He would be protected by the heavens and earth. Anyone who dared to take action against him would be severely punished by the heavens and earth. Currently, Yu the Great was absolutely safe. However, after he set up the boundary of the Nine Province, everything would be different. The heavens and earth would no longer protect him, and he would become the target of the heavenly axiom's destruction. In fact, the heavenly axiom had created such a huge formation to force Yu the Great to stop. Unless it had no other choice, the heavenly axiom was not willing to take action against a person of great merit. That was because it would undoubtedly cause the value of merit to decrease. In the past, merit was the biggest protection in the Eldritch universe. Therefore, the people respected merit very much. But now, even those with great merit could not escape the annihilation of the heavenly axiom. This would undoubtedly affect the status of merit in the hearts of the people. Merit wasn't omnipotent. Once this impression was formed, the impact would undoubtedly be huge. The people of the world did not want to obtain merit as urgently as before. This was to the heavens and earth. It could be considered a loss. After all, every time the heavens and earth gave merit, it meant that something beneficial to the primordial world had happened. However, although merit was important, it was not a reason to defy the heavens. Defying the heavens was the beginning of disturbing the world. It would bring too many variables to the entire world. And the heavenly axiom, what he hated the most was variables. The entire primordial world was enveloped by the heavenly axiom. The moment the living beings were born, their fates had already been arranged by the heavenly axiom. Everything. They only needed to follow the established trajectory. The meaning of the existence of variables was to disrupt the arrangements of the heavenly axiom. In that case, how could the heavenly axiom not hate it? The greatest result of defying the heavens was to create a huge variable, thus disrupting the trajectory of the heavenly axiom and leading the world to the unknown. It was in order to lead the world back to the right track that the heavenly axiom would kill those who defied the heavens without mercy. It was the same even if they had great merit. Merit was never a reason to defy the heavens. Although he knew that everyone would not attack Yu the Great, Emperor Northstar still wanted to warn everyone. His purpose was naturally to express his attitude. Yu the Great is the human emperor of the human race. If you want to touch him, You have to consider carefully whether you can withstand the anger of a primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian. As soon as Emperor Northstar expressed a stance, the great divine abilities immediately restrained themselves and stopped all kinds of small actions. And this was the power of a primordial chaos expert. Ridiculously powerful. However, even though he had achieved such an obvious effect, Emperor Northstar was not happy at all, because it was too calm. The Three Pure Ones' performance was too calm. This was completely illogical. If the Three Pure Ones were willing to make a move, even if they did not show their faces, they would only release their aura to contend with him. If that was the case, the great masters would not have retreated so quickly. Chapter 679. However, from the beginning to the end, the Three Pure Ones did not make any movements. Obviously, this was not because they were afraid of the North Star Emperor, because the North Star Emperor did not have the qualifications to make the Three Pure Ones fear him. Then, the reason why they did not make a move was worth pondering. Perhaps they had a bigger plan. This made the North Star Emperor frown. He did not feel at ease if he could not figure out the true purpose of the Three Pure Ones. The calmer the Three Pure Ones appeared, the more turbulent the undercurrent hidden under the surface was. It would bring about unexpected changes in the future. However, even if the North Star Emperor knew that the Three Pure Ones must have a plan, he had to admit that with his current strength, he could not do anything to the Three Pure Ones. In fact, if they really fought, he would not be a match for the Three Pure Ones. At the moment, he did not know the specific plan of the Three Pure Ones. He could only try his best to increase his strength in case there was no way to deal with the unknown changes. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, 1,000 years had passed. After 1,000 years of hard work, Yu the Great's plan to set up the barrier of the 9 provinces had reached the most critical moment. The 9 provinces had been divided. They were just waiting to bury the 9 cauldrons and seal the 9 beasts to complete the last step. This was because the 9 beasts sealed by the 9 cauldrons were used to feed the 9 cauldrons and let them devour them. Therefore, the final outcome would definitely not be too good. Yu the Great did not like to kill, so he did not want to sacrifice the experts of the 10,000 races. Of course, the biggest reason was that the experts of the 10,000 races had not made a big mistake. So Yu the Great could not kill them for no reason. No matter how afraid the 10,000 races were of the human race, they would rebel against the human race if they killed the experts of the 10,000 races for no reason. This would cause the primordial world, which had just returned to peace, to fall into conflict again, causing countless living beings to die tragically. Yu the Great did not want to see this scene, so he did not choose to attack the experts of the 10,000 races. Otherwise, although Yu the Great was merciful, he would not be merciful at this critical moment that concerned the future of the human race. Moreover, after the exploitation of the human emperors, how many decent experts could the 10,000 races have left? They could not meet the needs of the 9 cauldrons at all. Therefore, in order to maximize the power of the barrier of the 9 provinces, Yu the Great did not hesitate to mobilize the strength of the entire human race. He even asked a few great allies of the human race to take action. First, he joined forces with the Dragon Tribe and the Black Tortoise Tribe to capture 3 Xiantian fierce beasts that were comparable to quasi-saints from the deep sea abyss. Then he joined forces with the Phoenix Clan, the Kylan Clan, the White Tiger Clan, the Sorcerer Clan, and many other top clans in the Untainted Land. From the Undying Volcano, the depths of the canyon, and the fiend god graveyard of the Netherrealm, he had captured 6 Xiantian ferocious beasts that were comparable to quasi-saint experts. In this way, he had finally gathered 9 connate ferocious beasts of the quasi-saint level. He believed that after the 9 cauldrons devoured the 9 sage-to-be Xiantian fierce beasts, they would not be far from becoming Xiantian cardinal treasures. After all, although connate wild beasts were much less intelligent than connate gods, they were much stronger than connate gods in other aspects. especially the power contained in their flesh and blood. It could be said that apart from the lack of intelligence, Khanate ferocious beasts were full of good points. No wonder first-generation Khanate wild beasts of the primeval era were able to suppress first-generation Khanate godfiends. After preparing the 9 sage-to-be, Xiantian ferocious beasts, Yu the Great began the last step of setting up the boundary of the 9 provinces. Sacrifice to the heavens. That's right, it was a sacrifice to the heavens. It was true that the heavenly Tao did not hide its killing intent towards Yu the Great, but it was only targeting Yu the Great. The heavenly Tao did not object to the establishment of the boundary of the 9 provinces. On the contrary, it was supportive. Compared to cultivators, mortals undoubtedly caused less damage to the world and were easier to manage. Mortals had so many advantages, so the heavenly Tao would naturally like them more and be willing to protect them. The reason why the heavenly Tao wanted to kill Yu the Great was not because it wanted to set up the boundary of the 9 provinces, but because once it set up the boundary of the 9 provinces, it could become the 9th great emperor of the human race in one fell swoop. This was obviously not allowed by the heavenly Tao. This was the contradiction between the heavenly Tao and Yu the Great. Yu the Great was too outstanding. So outstanding that the destiny of the human race spontaneously pushed him to the position of great emperor. However, the heavenly Tao did not want Yu the Great to be so outstanding. After the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the human king was the end of the human race. There should not be any more human emperors. No matter how peerless and stunning you were, you could not advance further. If you advanced, you would be defying the heavens. Wasn't it good to be a human king? Why did you have to defy the heavens? Human Tao. It should be after the heavenly Tao, not before the heavenly Tao. This was the reason why the heavenly Tao had no choice but to take action. If the human race was allowed to continue developing like this, there might be a day when the human Tao suppressed the heavenly Tao. However, how could the heavenly Tao allow this to happen? Based on the current scale of the human race could already represent the human Tao to a certain extent. Therefore, suppressing the human race was almost equivalent to suppressing the human Tao. It had become inevitable. Roar, roar, roar. In front of the 9-level altar, the 9 quasi-sage Khanate ferocious beasts seemed to have sensed something and could not help but let out miserable cries. Unfortunately, no matter what kind of sounds they made, they could not shake Yu the Great's determination. The heavenly Tao is above. Today, in order to protect all living beings in the world, Yu the Great has specially set up the boundary of the 9 provinces in the territory of the human race. May the heavenly Tao be the judge! After completing the specific process, Yu the Great ignored the struggles of the 9 Khanate ferocious beasts and expressionlessly sent them into the 9 provinces' cauldrons one by one. He began the last step, which was also the most crucial step, burying the 9 provinces' cauldrons. Go! After the 9 cauldrons suppressed the 9 Khanate ferocious beasts, Yu the Great formed a Tao seal and activated the human Tao imperial seal with all his might to guide the power of destiny of the human race. Rumble! Amidst the rumbling of the world, the destiny of the human race appeared from the void and turned into a mighty torrent of the human Tao. It wrapped around the 9 cauldrons in the air and fell toward the 9 provinces. Boom! When the 9 cauldrons fell, the corresponding land of the 9 provinces cracked open and automatically opened a huge crack, revealing the altar that had been built in advance. Swoosh! As if attracted by some mysterious force, the 9 cauldrons fell accurately on the 9 altars. Then, with a rumbling sound, the cracked earth automatically closed up and returned to its original state. Buzz, 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 as the 9 cauldrons returned to their positions. 9 majestic forces suddenly rose from the ground and spread out in the sky above the human territory. In the blink of an eye, they formed a huge boundary that enveloped the entire human territory. At the same time, the world trembled inexplicably and the laws rumbled together. The radiance of the human Tao burst out from the void and turned into a powerful force that supported the boundary of the 9 provinces. This was the human Tao had made its move. The moment the boundary of the 9 provinces was set up, all the cultivators in the human territory felt that they were different from before. However, they could not pinpoint the exact difference. Only the Tai Jinxian and the cultivators above them, who had already come into contact with the Tao, could vaguely feel something. In the future, cultivators would probably not be able to touch mortals. Not to mention how shocked the cultivators in the human territory were. With the formation of the boundary of the 9 provinces, Yu the Great also ushered in his own death tribulation. Rumble. The destiny of the human race came in a mighty manner and turned into a huge flame that floated above Yu the Great's head. It gathered the power of the world for him to help him ascend to the throne. With the addition of the power, Yu the Great's body also underwent an inexplicable change. The half of the Emperor Purple Chi that had already existed before was now growing at a speed visible to the naked eye under the support of the power. In the blink of an eye, another half of the Emperor Purple Chi was born and became a whole. But at the moment when the Imperial Purple Chi was born, a shocking dragon roar resounded in the sky. At the same time, Yu the Great's body suddenly rose with boundless majesty and swept across the untainted world. For a moment, the world fell silent and submitted to Yu the Great's majesty. Swoosh! The Emperor Purple Chi wandered around Yu the Great's body and rushed towards his innate, indestructible, true spirit. It wanted to fuse with it to help Yu the Great complete the final transformation. However, just as Yu the Great's innate, indestructible, true spirit was about to come into contact with the Emperor Purple Chi, a supreme power suddenly descended and acted on Yu the Great's body. It forcefully froze the Emperor Purple Chi, causing it to stop on the spot. The heavenly Tao, it made its move. The moment Yu the Great was about to become an emperor, the heavenly Tao made its move. It used its supreme power to forcefully freeze the Emperor Purple Chi, preventing it from fusing with Yu the Great's innate, indestructible, true spirit. The Emperor Purple Chi was clearly only a line away from Yu the Great's innate, indestructible, true spirit. However, under the power of the heavenly Tao, this line of distance became an unreachable chasm. Rumble, a sound that sounded like the sky splitting suddenly resounded in the ears of all living beings. It dispelled Yu the Great's majesty and attracted the attention of all the powerful figures. Lightning. In the sky, it was filled with lightning and was extremely dazzling. This was the wrath of the heavens. Yu the Great's act of defying the heavens and becoming an emperor had finally angered the heavenly Tao, causing it to send down the wrath of the heavens to kill him. Rumble. Endless lightning slanted down and pounced towards Yu the Great, wanting to drown him so that he could completely annihilate this heaven-defying person. That lightning was not ordinary lightning, but innate divine lightning. Moreover, it was the most powerful purple heaven divine lightning. This divine lightning was formed from Tao ancestor Hong Jun's supreme divine ability. Any one of them had the power to severely injure a quasi-sage. Even Feng Zichen did not dare to take hundreds of millions of lightning bolts head-on, let alone Yu the Great. Looking at the purple heaven divine lightning in the sky that was like a sea of lightning, not to mention that he had not become an emperor yet. Even if he really became an emperor, he would not be able to escape the fate of death. Rumble. Just as the purple heaven divine lightning that was like a sea of lightning was about to fall, a golden light suddenly rose from Yu the Great's body and shone on the dazzling purple heaven divine lightning. Swoosh! As if it had met its natural enemy, the thunderclouds that were shone on by the golden light melted like snow and quickly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, more than 1/3 of it disappeared. It was also at this moment that the golden light on Yu the Great's body had exhausted all its power and gradually extinguished. This golden light was naturally the merit that Yu the Great had accumulated earlier. At this moment of danger, it suddenly erupted and resolved part of the calamity. Although it was only 1/3, it was still a good thing for you the Great. It made his future, which had completely fallen into a dead silence, have a little more vitality. After the merit, another wisp of human Tao light burst out from the void and swept towards the purple heaven lightning tribulation, wiping out another 1/3 of it. As a result, only 1/3 of the tribulation cloud was left, and its power could be said to have been greatly reduced. You the Great's chances of surviving this tribulation had undoubtedly increased by a lot. However, before Feng Zichen, who was watching the scene from afar, could feel happy, he saw another change in the sky. As if it had been angered by the human Tao's attack, the heavenly Tao began to tremble. In reality, the weakened purple heaven lightning tribulation began to expand again. However, the lightning tribulation had been weakened twice. Even if the heavenly Tao personally strengthened it, there was a limit. Therefore, after the lightning tribulation expanded to half of its original size, no matter how the heavenly Tao supported it, the lightning tribulation did not move at all. It was obvious that it had reached its limit. Under the pull of the two forces, the power of the lightning tribulation was fixed at half of its original power. However, although the power of the lightning tribulation had been reduced by half, it was still extremely dangerous for you the Great, who was only a half-step primordial chaos. According to Feng Zichen's estimation, even if the power of the lightning tribulation had been reduced by half, it still belonged to the primordial chaos realm. In other words, the tribulation that you the Great was facing belonged to the primordial chaos realm. Although this lightning tribulation was considered the weakest primordial chaos tribulation, the weakest primordial chaos was still primordial chaos. It was far from what existences below primordial chaos could contend against. There was a huge gap between primordial chaos and half-step primordial chaos. Unless one had a treasure like a connate cardinal treasure, it was absolutely difficult to cross it. Yes, you the Great had the connate cardinal treasure, the human Tao imperial seal. However, what he was facing now was the heavenly tribulation. If it was an ordinary time, even if you the Great, who held the human Tao imperial seal, could not defeat the true primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian, it was more than enough to protect himself. However, in front of the heavenly tribulation, you the Great could not use the power of a Dharma treasure other than using his own strength, merit, and luck. Otherwise, the heavenly Tao would send down a tribulation of the same level as the Dharma treasure. The human Tao imperial seal was a connate cardinal treasure. If you the Great used it to resist the tribulation, the heavenly Tao would send down a tribulation of the same level as the connate cardinal treasure. A connate cardinal treasure was an existence that was comparable to the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian. Just thinking about the tribulation of that level was terrifying. In fact, it was even stronger than the tribulation that you the Great was currently facing. You the Great, who was not confident in transcending the tribulation, had no hope of transcending the tribulation if the human Tao imperial seal was added to it. Therefore, you the Great could only choose to bear this death tribulation by himself. Outsiders could not help him at all. Even Feng Zichen was no exception. The only thing he could do was to help you the Great block all the tribulations other than the lightning tribulation so that he could transcend the tribulation in peace. Although you the Great's lightning tribulation was strong, it was not impossible for him to transcend it with his foundation. Then why did he say that this tribulation was his death tribulation? The reason was because what truly made him lose all hope was the tribulation that came from outside the heavenly tribulation. For example, the human tribulation. Since the heavenly Tao had already attacked you the Great, it naturally meant that the halo on him was gone. In other words, during you the Great's tribulation, the powerful beings could attack him without any scruples and did not have to worry about bearing negative karma. You the Great, who was already in danger under the lightning tribulation, naturally had no chance of survival when faced with the attacks of the powerful beings. Therefore, you the Great's tribulation was called the death tribulation. Rumble. Countless purple heaven divine lightning struck down and drowned you the great. In just an instant his skin and flesh were split open. However, even in the face of such a lightning tribulation, you the great still had the strength to struggle. For this, apart from being strong enough, it was also because of Feng Zichen. A long time ago, Feng Zichen knew that if the heavenly Tao attacked you the great, there would definitely be a lightning tribulation. After all, lightning was one of the supreme methods that the heavenly Tao used to control the primordial world. If the heavenly Tao wanted to descend a tribulation, how could it not have lightning? Since he had already expected this scene, Feng Zichen was naturally prepared. He might not be able to weaken the power of the lightning tribulation, but increasing you the great's resistance to lightning was not too difficult for him. Don't forget that the great emperor of the South Pole had the title of the ancestor of lightning. With the great emperor of the South Pole sparing no expense, he could naturally increase you the great's resistance to lightning to the highest. With you the great's current situation, even in the face of such a powerful heavenly tribulation, he could still be immune to 30% of its power. Don't underestimate this 30%. At this moment of life and death, every time the power of the lightning tribulation weakened, the chances of you, the great, surviving would increase. 30% was enough to change too much. At the very least, it could barely ensure that you, the great, survived the lightning tribulation. Rumble. The purple heaven divine lightning struck down mercilessly, vowing to destroy all of you, the great's vitality. However, in the sea of lightning, although you, the great, seemed to be in danger, he did not fall and maintained his breath. Judging from his performance, he had a high chance of surviving this tribulation. Seeing that the lightning tribulation could not kill you, the great, the powerful beings hiding in the dark moved. They appeared from the void and charged towards you, the great, who was in the lightning tribulation. The human tribulation was also a part of the heavenly punishment. Therefore, when the powerful beings attacked you, the great, at this time, they would not be regarded as interfering with the tribulation by the heavenly Tao and would be punished accordingly. Boom! 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 One terrifying aura after another erupted from the void and reverberated between heaven and earth. That powerful force distorted the void and interfered with the normal operation of heaven and earth. At this moment, all the cultivators whose cultivation had not reached Daluo Jinxian lost consciousness. How can a person who defies the heavens exist in this world? Human Emperor Yu, the Great, defies the heavens and is not tolerated by heaven and earth. Therefore, he obeys the orders of the heavenly Tao. Kill. Numerous terrifying figures surrounded by the laws of the grand Tao appeared amidst the cold and indifferent voice. Crack! Crack! With their appearance, heaven and earth actually showed signs of instability and was about to collapse. At the same time, unparalleled killing intent erupted from their bodies and attacked you, the great, together. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.